Universidad Industrial de Santander, and our doctoral student. John Alexis Guerra from Los Andes University. This Lord Atufer, ¿cómo se dice eso en gringoles?
Francés, ni idea.
El hombre que hace de todo.
Ah, Handyman, no. Go to man, tal vez.
I don't know. You are the gringo.
Am I?
And he's working in visual analytics in our team. Omar, this comes from computational mechanics. Our partner in scientific visualization, and so on. And in this, the schedule of the workshop is very simple, and the dynamics is depending on your contributions. We have right now, and I will stop this introduction with the poster session. The poster author will do a very short invitation. Very short is very short. Maximum 1 minute, but we will be very recognizing if it's only 30 seconds. To motivate us to go to visit the posters. The posters will be or are exhibited in the basement 1 in this same building. And the posters are exhibited from now. And the poster session that we will be all of us there is at 3:30 in this afternoon. And after this, we will have a session in our Polity laboratory to invite you to use and utilize our activities in the project in order to have the feedback. All this effort is made to enhance our use of feedback of our colleagues and to appreciate the different point of view around the academical activity. And this exercise to go to the critics and to take the critics to enhance our work is a very, very important. I think that is the main spirit of this workshop. So today we will have 4 very interesting talks, and always with invitation to exchange about the different main topics of visual computing. And tomorrow we will have at 9 o'clock after the match, because some people talk to me about an exotic event as the World Cup. Donc, we will exceptionally, I accept you with at 9 o'clock. Daniel Aliaga will do the main talk tomorrow. And after, we have a very, very interesting phase that we are working in the last years of exchange with some enterprises or some people, more precisely, that is working with the visual computing application in the real market, and how to exchange about the topics and direction of our activity, seeking to define collaboration activity with real impact in our environment. This is the main goal of the journey of tomorrow, that is only the morning. Okay. Donc, I will begin with the poster invitation. No, yo sé que los míos los títulos nuestros, pero... ¿Arrancamos con eso? Listo. So we have some sets of posters, and some of them did a very nice presentation. Others have no very nice presentation. So we will see.
Esteban no está. Nice. Entonces, Nicolás.
Okay, hi. So my project is a joint project with the business school. We were actually trying to analyze the token market. That is a difficult market because we don't have very reliable data. So with this problem, we try to use an alternative source, that is the New York Times articles that contain this keyword. We made this data set, and using this data set of article data, we try to infer and learn more about this complex market in order to propose policies or even know how to act on this in the future. We use certain visualizations and we try story based on what we learn from these articles. In the future, we want to work with more news sources, and this will certainly be interesting for our country since we don't have really reliable information of this for this time period, that is between the 70s and nowadays. I invite you to see my poster downstairs so you can learn more about it.
Okay, so since we don't have them, and Esteban is the first one, so Consejo Abierto is one of the applications that one of my students, Esteban Dalel, did with the Bogotá's Council. Basically, his idea in there was to try to help them organize a little bit the information that they have been flowing around the console. And the whole concept is that they had a bunch of Excel files, and they were sharing all of those, trying to get the idea of what was happening about each one of the council members. So what Esteban did was to construct a mobile-first application that is very easy to use, and that will have very readily information for them to exchange comments and understand what things have been happening in the council. So basically, the idea there is that excuse me, each one of the council members will have like a small sub-page. And when you enter that page, you can see different kinds of information about them that is extremely important for them, such as who voted for this person, like, and that's what you can see on the map. Or like what have they been talking about on Twitter, which is one of the main channels, like public channels that have been using to communicate information. Okay, so if you want to know more about it, please feel free to visit Esteban's poster. You already saw Nicolás. Juan Camilo is not yet here. He's one of my current master's students. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this later during my project, but he's working on an interesting application called Tadava, or Tadava, I don't know how you pronounce that in English. Basically, the whole idea of that is the evolution of a research project we have been working on. The whole idea is to allow people to navigate and understand multidimensional data in a very effective way without having to even know too much about data science or data analytics. So basically what we created, it's this widget called Navío. And with that, you can explore on the browser all the information that you can fit on the browser. That it's about 200 megabytes. and which is quite sizable. And we have been doing some tests that show like very encouraging results. However, Juan Guillermo maybe has something about this. So, well, anyhow, so the whole idea is that we want to go beyond what we can get just in the browser. So with Tadaba, what we are doing is creating a connector that would allow you to have a backend that could scale up to the level that you want, such that you can have in the front end only the interface and then be transmitting the data between the two hosts, such that you can have quick interactions. And what by quick, I mean something that is less than 300 milliseconds, that is the amount of time that you have before people lost attention. So as you just did with me, because I've been talking too much. So Luis, I think I saw him here, so I will pass the mic to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Mesa, and alongside with John, we were exploring how the tree maps could be a useful tool for summarizing and navigating many galleries. Basically what we want was to know if what we want was to create a tool that allowed us to group the images based in its metadata. For example, one of the things that we do was build some examples to test if the Photo tree map, a tool developed by John Guerra, is useful for this purpose. One example is called Instagram Trends, and its purpose is to compare the users in Instagram. For example, here we are comparing Cristiano Ronaldo with Leo Messi, and we see that Cristiano Ronaldo is more popular than Leo Messi. The other example is MoMA Navigator, which its function is to navigate through the artworks of the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art of New York. So if you want to know more about this tool or what we find using tree maps for summarizing and navigating image galleries, please come with my poster. I will be waiting for you.
Hi everyone, my name is Juan Guillermo, and my project is called ChipJar. That is a visualization tool that is the exploration, navigation, and summarization of data. This is the main interface, and this tool consists in a web application that you just have to drag and drop your files. ChipJar makes all the rest of the job for you. And it allows the user to upload, process, explore, summarize, and visualize a dataset, and also enables the user to explore an interactive visualization or just the data that you just fed to. So if you are interested in my project, you could come out to watch out.
And I think we have one more, and Esteban and David are two of the volunteers that we have today helping with registration. That's why they are not here. I cannot speak for Juan Camilo, so the blame is on him for that. So Photo Ring, it's another application in the same flavor of photo visualization. Basically, the whole idea is in here is what do you do when you have millions of photos and you want to navigate them. So suppose that those photos have metadata, such as what is the camera that the photo was taken with, or like what is the date, of course, or you can even recognize people in there, or locations, and things like that. So the whole idea with that, I created a prototype that allowed people to navigate these things using the different dimensions, and then while keeping the context, which is the key part of this, being able to switch from one dimension to the other. So I'm going to show more of this during my presentation. But basically, the whole concept is that maybe you're looking across, like, for instance, what is the author or the camera that the photo was taken with. And then you reach to an interesting photo that was maybe taken in a national park or something like that, like in Tayrona National Park in Colombia. And then you want to see more photos of that. So while keeping that photo, you can switch the dimension and then keep on looking only at photos that you have from that same national park. And then maybe you reach a photo from the national park during December, and you want to see only more photos from December. So that is the main concept. So basically what I did is that I gave David this prototype. He polished it up, fixed many bugs that I had in there because I didn't have enough time to work on it, and then created different architectures to try to measure what was the speed of running this on like a relational database versus a document-based database, and presented some results that he can explain to you during the poster. So if you're interested, please feel free to join that. That is Esteban. I presented his project earlier, so you can reach him out for Consejo Abierto. That is the first one I did. So that is all I have for my projects.
Please, all the poster authors happy here to the pitch.
No vayas a cerrar.
No, listo, entonces.
Si necesitas otro.
No, dejemos así. Hello everyone. My name is David Mayorga. I'm a student here from the University of the Los Andes. And well, what do I want to present for you is the application, the training application for residents, orthopedic residents that we got here in Polity laboratory. Actually, if you want, we could, you can try it at 5 p.m. You can try it with that. What do we want to do with that? You can, we can receive the residents from Fundación La Santa Fe, and actually we are receiving from first year from orthopedic residents. What do we want to do with that? With human-machine interaction and with haptic perception, we want to describe the reduction process from a traumatology surgery. First of all, we want to measure, for example, how long they have to how long have to take to achieve those reduction process, and for example, how well have they done. But how could you measure that? That's the first problem. For example, we can found. That's why all the process that on all the project we could find there. I have told that we can the haptic perception, and and we got with mixed reality too. For example, we can the surgical room, the immersive surgical room with that. And what else can we say? Okay, and
I'm waiting for you.
No. We got a lot of levels, and what can we do? We have created the virtual surgical room and distinct types of levels.
It's all.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Más breve que.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia. I am a student of the Master in System Engineer here in the university. I invite you to know about our work in progress for counting vehicles automatically in videos using image processing and visual analytics techniques. These videos belong to the Secretary of Mobility of Bogotá. Nowadays, the entity spends a great amount of money doing the vehicle count manually. For this reason, this project is important for the entity because it represents an important investment that the entity could reinvest in other projects more important for the city.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian Vargas. I come in company with Wilson Sarmiento. He's a great professor, and I work with him. We are working currently on parametric animation for virtual characters in virtual environments and video games. So what we want to do is focus mainly on facial animation based on parameters. So essentially what we want to do is replace any vector character space with a mask that we are trying to develop right now because it's a work in progress. We're only showing preliminary results. So what it's supposed to do is it fits on any face of any character and any avatar. So it can create emotion, it can create happiness based on parameters, and based on things we want to do to make the animation process easier for the creation of these characters in virtual environments. So if you want to learn more, we invite you. We'll be waiting for you downstairs so you can see a poster and you can ask us more questions.
Thank you. Next one. Omar. Where is you? Tuyo. ¿Y qué más hace falta? ¿Qué más hace falta de posters? Para que se dinamicen. Sí, que sí, pasa. Si no, Christoph will be late.
Good morning. My name is Sergio Augusto Helves Cortés. I'm a PhD student in the High Performance Printing Center in Bucaramanga, in WIS. My advisor is Professor Carlos Henning. We are interested in the center at this moment in situ processing and in visualization because we need to support some research process of other research groups. So we proposed a project to create an in situ visualization scheme to try to gain more performance in the visualization operations. And we created a performance evaluation roadmap to evaluate the visualization algorithm that we are going to evaluate, and that's the subject of the poster. So we not only encourage you to come and ask us questions, but suggestions as well. We'll be there. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Omar Lopez. I am an associate professor from the Mechanical Engineering Department. And well, I'm glad for the invitation of Professor Jose Tiberio for this event. And what we do at the Computational Mechanics Research Group in the Mechanical Engineering Department is the development and application of numerical methods in the solution of mechanical engineering problems, especially related with fluid mechanics. So typically when we do these kind of simulations, we generate a lot of data. And then after that, we have to take this information and try to visualize what's inside that fluid flow phenomenon, because it gives us a lot of information about the problem that we are trying to solve. So basically, one of the topics that is related with this event is the visualization of flow structures and features, and also identification of flow features. So in this area, we are going to show two posters. One is the flow visualization of the cross flow in a hatchback passenger vehicle. This poster will be shown by an intern that we have in our group, Lucy Mesquita. She's from ENSTA Paritech. And the other poster that we will be showing today is the near and far away visualization of the flow around a vertical axis Darius turbine, which will be shown by Juan Camilo Hurtado, who is a graduate student at UNIERDE. So please stop by our posters. Any question that you may have. I know that probably is not the typical topic related with the computer science community, but any suggestions and questions that you may have about this problem is welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last one.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pedro Gonzalez. I'm a student here in the System of Computer Engineering Master's degree. I'm working with Polity in heterogeneous virtual reality environments. So the idea is how can we provide a similar experience to different users that are using different devices in the same collaborative environment. And so that's it. The idea is I have different users using different devices doing the same tasks in a collaborative environment, virtual reality environment. We create rules or frameworks or identify the main aspects to avoid the influence of the devices in accomplish the task or the interactive social possibilities. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no more posters? Okay. You will see this afternoon the variety and the quality of our current work we should discuss. Okay. Thank you very much for all the authors. And the first talk is our keynote, Christoph Gart. Christoph is a professor in Kaiserslautern University. His main direction of work is about scientific visualization with a very strong component of topological basis in order to define and to find the right approach to solve the very huge challenges of scientific visualization of our friends of mainly mechanical engineer, but more and more the works in biomedical and the very low scales scientific work in biophysics produce a huge amount of data with a very interesting information, but it's very difficult to analyze, and the interaction with the experts is one of the issues that we are working very heavily, and Christoph is one of the starting of this very hard work to address this kind of challenge. Of course, we will have a personal problem with the Macintosh tribu, but we have to manage use of Macintosh tribu with them, no problem. We are lost. Okay. Me toca el telonero. Sure. The website of the workshop. We have our final draft, of our program, and the first judgment is only swapping between these two presentations, these two talks. The only changement for today. And tomorrow, as promised, we will begin at 9 o'clock. And here we will have some exchange with this. I put the name industrial track, but it's more university enterprise collaborative work. And these three examples is because we are conducting some works seeking the right way to collaborate in order to produce more added value for our industrial sector here, that we put our effort at the service of the country growth. Wow. Professor Garth, thank you very much to be here with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm super happy to be here one more time. Thank you for organizing all of this. DRD may be paying, but the hard work is being done here, so thank you very much for that. So after overcoming the challenge of kind of getting my slides on the screen, I will now want to talk to you a little bit about sort of some challenges in scientific visualization in modern computational science. How much time do I have? So we started a bit behind schedule. Should I try to stick to 30 minutes? 40 minutes? Okay, I'll try. I want this to be an interactive talk, so if you have any questions, please feel free to shout at me at any time. Otherwise, I might just explain things to pass. And rest assured that if you have a question, half of the other people will have the same question, so it's okay to ask. All right, so my area of research is scientific visualization in computational science. I lead the scientific visualization lab at the University of Kaiserslautern. Many of you are everyday users of scientific visualization whenever you look at something like the weather report, for example. So what is the idea behind scientific visualization? Well, in a nutshell, it's kind of turning scientific data into images that help somebody figure out something about the data. And for the weather report, that's quite simple. Actually, there's a bunch of weather stations all throughout the country that gather measurements. From that, a simulation is being set up that is then run on a supercomputer, and sort of the TV takes this data and makes images out of that to actually help you show this. There are many areas where scientific visualization is used, like in medicine. You can see this on the top left, and the bottom left. Aerodynamics, many different areas. It's actually a quite old discipline. It's been around for about, 30 years as a discipline of itself. So the question is always, what exactly does this mean, turning images into data? There are many different definitions to actually talk about this. One I'm particularly fond of is the general definition that's been given by Tamara Masna recently. So, which basically phrases visualization in terms of providing visual representations of data sets that are designed to help people carry out tasks more efficiently, right? So, for the weather report, the task is, do I need to pack an umbrella or not? Or how should I dress? This is the task. And sort of the visualization needs to be effective in the sense that it helps you make an informed decision on this topic. How is this different from many other computer science techniques, for example, machine learning? Well, visualization is really about putting the human in the loop, so helping or incorporating humans into decision making, and not really replacing people with computational decision making methods. So when you have a computational method, so if you have a machine learning algorithm that tells you now is the right time to sell your shares, then you should probably do that, and maybe visualization may not even be needed. But there are many hard problems where there are no good automated algorithms, so for that we need visualization. Right. The key tasks are really exploring and discovering things about your data, forming hypotheses about the data and confirming them, and then communicating whatever you find new results to others using visual means. Computational science is the sort of this area that cuts across science and engineering, mathematics and computer science, that somehow combines theoretical modeling, physical experiments, and then computational experiments to actually help understand something about engineering and scientific problems, right? And visualization actually is to be found in a lot of different ways in this computational science. So, of course, kind of in the computation part, you need to figure out, like, why is my simulation working or not? Experimental data must be visualized, and this draws on all these different subfields of computer science. Why is this becoming such a relevant problem, or why has it been maybe not so much a problem in the last 30 years? Why is there a renewed effort to do research on this? Well, because really computational science is experiencing sort of a paradigm shift from simple to very complex and high-end computation. So you may have seen sort of one of these big supercomputers that are now very prevalent. So just last week, the newest supercomputer summit at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory was unveiled. It's at the top of the top 500 list, which records the largest supercomputers in the world. And this is a machine that actually does 200 petaflops computation. So 200 peta floating point operations per second computation. So if you translate that to your typical laptop, that would be the same computing power as about 3 to 4 million laptops. And using so much computational power, you can really start simulating physics very well and other phenomena. But on the downside, from this much computation, there's also usually an insane amount of data that you get. So increasing the complexity, the scale, and the resolution of the data, right? The data is so large that you can't just take your laptop and do stuff. There's so much structure and complexity, and we'll see some examples of that, that it's no longer enough to just look at it, make a picture and look at it. Right? Here's a sort of one actually very tame example. This is the flow of water through some limestone that a collaborator of mine has simulated at the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And even this innocuous-looking simulation already incorporates 500 gigabytes of data to describe how water propagates through a piece of limestone. Right? It sounds like an easy problem, and physically the experiment is kind of easy to do. You just pour water on the limestone. But computationally, to model this accurately, you need to kind of go to a resolution where the data becomes just very overwhelming. Right? It's no longer very easy to make a picture of it. Here's another example that I very much like. This is just a very simple simulation of sort of a jet of high velocity fluid entering the domain. And what's visualized here is sort of the formation of vortices in this domain. We'll talk about this a little bit in a little while, but you can see how much structure there is in this rather relatively simple problem. The data that comes out of this is already 1 terabyte in size, right? Now you may say, like, well, 1 terabyte, that's not so bad. I can go to the electronics store and get a hard drive with 1 terabyte. Where's the problem? True, but you can still only read that 1 terabyte at 100 megabytes per second into your computer, so you wait a very long time for this to process, right? So we're at a point where computational science, these simulations all work very nicely. They produce great results, but it's hard to figure out what to do with these results because the things are so overwhelming. So Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Just to know the state of the art, because I'm not very aware of it. How do you test? How do you test that the visualization that you have in some way has some validity? For example, the previous one that you had.
You mean this one? So how does this have validity in reality? So in this case, it's actually fairly straightforward because the physics behind the simulation, we take that for granted that this works well enough. Numerics is always a bit tricky, but you know that if the resolution is high enough, the physics will be accurate. And then the visualization that actually comes out is Q, it's a physical criterion that tells you there's one here, right?
So we trust the physics in some way.
In some way, in this case, physics to some extent, right? You know, there's always difficulties. I'm going to talk about this a little bit because there's that you could call uncertainty, which basically says like, well, you know, given all these numerical errors and stuff, how much can we really trust the simulation? But people are inclined to say like, well, if we model this, you know, from first principles physically, and then the algorithm, we're sure it's correct, then there is a lot of trust in these types of simulations. You could, of course, try to do verification, really, but it's a very tough problem because we don't know what you're looking for. So I call this kind of modern simulation data to distinguish it a little bit from sort of the simulation data that my PhD advisor worked with, right, one generation before. Because there it used to be like small data, individual variables to visualize and so on. So these days we have kind of sort of complexity or increased complexity along 4 axes, right? The first one is the complexity of the data itself, right? The resolution gives you a structural richness of the data that doesn't make it easy to just like, well, here's a feature and there isn't, or I get a million of features, which ones are interesting, which ones aren't. So what's needed is sort of a much better way to understand what's interesting about the data set, right? So simple feature definitions like this is a vortex, this isn't, don't really hold much longer anymore, and we need some way to quantify what's interesting about the data and to simplify sort of the visual representation, because nobody wants to look at a million vortices one by one, right? That's not scalable. A second axis of complexity is that increasingly the computational power is being used to not only model simple problems, but very complicated problems. For example, combustion. It's a problem that involves the physics of fluids. So how is airflow, for example, going in the combustion domain, but also the chemistry of species in the combustion, right? So there are many different chemical species. They all play a role in the combustion. And so what you get out of this is just a data set that has an insane number of variables, like typically, hundreds to thousands of variables. So we cannot simply say like, well, let's just do something simple as we used to do in the past, maybe compute a level set or something like that. That does not provide the insight that is sought after for such data sets. Uncertainty is also being accounted for in the modeling. So, for example, if you want to understand sort of the propagation of, poison in groundwater, there's a spilling accident or something like that. The composition of the ground is typically known, but not in very much detail, right? It's kind of sand, and maybe limestone and stuff like that. But it's really difficult to exactly say, like, well, at this point, the density is so on. So there's some uncertainty sort of in the model, right? People don't know enough about the ground to make an accurate computational model. And representing this uncertainty in visualization is also a very difficult problem, right? If you don't account for it explicitly, it will be lost. And then last but not least, sort of algorithmically and really just practically, it's very challenging to work with data of this size, right? So we need efficient algorithms that somehow are also able to work on large machines with a lot of processors, or we need to think about maybe something entirely different, which is sort of the last thing I want to talk about today, institutional visualization. Good, so very quick outline. I'm going to give you a very quick tour through some of the modern paradigms. The selection is not entirely unself-serving. This is sort of where my group does most of their research. And this is necessarily an incomplete list, right? Because I would need a little more time to make a complete list, maybe a day or 3. So we're just going to look at some of the things that I consider particularly interesting. Good. Let's start with feature-based visualization. I told you it's very difficult to quantify what's interesting about a data set, right? And the term feature kind of tries to address this. It's not really a very specific or meaningful term, because feature is a very generic word. But it's used to kind of structure sort of the process of thinking about visualization, right? Features are the things that are by definition interesting about my data. Thanks so much. So I just put here as a working definition a subset of data that is interesting or relevant in the sense that it facilitates one or more of the 3 tasks of visualization, so exploration, hypothesis, confirmation, or communication, right? So that's a nice mental model, and we can always structure sort of the process of visualization in the form of a pipeline, where we kind of start with our input data, right? Then we do some pre-computations on it, maybe we derive some variables, we do some sums or something like that. We get the prepared data, then we filter that to only leave the focus data, only what's interesting about our data sets. And finally, we somehow map this to geometric primitives, and then we use techniques from computer graphics to render this, right? This is an image. And this is just one way of sketching out the process of visualization. Other people have sketched it out in different ways, but by and large, this is kind of how people think. So this feature definition kind of becomes interesting in a variety of steps here. First of all, in maybe what kinds of derived variables do we need to quantify our data? How do we extract these features specifically, for example, the vortices? And then finally, is there some good way to visualize these exactly? Like if they have a complex 3D-dimensional shape, maybe we just don't want to represent them. So domain knowledge, so knowledge about the problem behind the simulation or the data is really crucial here. I brought you a very simple example, the arrangement of wind turbines. So imagine in your future career you become a designer of wind farms, and you're faced with the problem of putting multiple of these wind turbines in several rows behind each other. One problem that happens in this setting is that the upstream turbines they rotate and their blades actually cut through the air and form very strong, very large vortices that are then carried downstream by the cross flow, all the while rotating, and they hit the second turbine here, and the second turbine then suffers an increased amount of mechanical stress just from sort of the air being very turbulent there. So if you do this wrong, the turbines in that second row will have a very high failure rate over time, much higher than the ones in the first row. So we worked with some computational scientists from Los Alamos National Laboratory who did the actual simulation and the modeling behind this problem, and they came to us with the problem of saying like, well, we can basically identify our features in the vortices, right? We can run some physical criterion to do this, but that doesn't really answer much because there are so many of them, and we're really only interested in kind of the interaction between, turbines in the first row and turbines in the second row that are somehow. So what we did was kind of use this feature-based process to come up with a good visualization system for them. So our feature definition was not only these are vortices that we're interested in, but really vortices that are generated at one turbine and transferred to another turbine, right? So picking two turbines, one in the first row and the second row, we only want to see the vortices that connect these two, right? And so then we came up with an algorithm of extracting these and a system to visualize this cleverly. What we did was kind of take the three blades of the first turbine, of the second turbine, and so these are the first three are of the first turbine, the second three of the second turbine, and kind of visualize on these turbines where the vortices hit and how they connect these things, right? If you do this naively in a three-dimensional setting, it becomes overwhelming visually because you can't really see anything, right? Because the structure is too complicated, and you don't have really the means. You need to zoom and pan a lot and fly around. It doesn't really work. And at the end of the day, what came out of this was a feature-based visualization system, right? That combines, all these views, this three-dimensional view, this blade-oriented view, and then some statistics they were interested in, to allow them to understand like when do problems appear in these things. They could just try out in this way with the system various arrangements of turbines and identify the ones that had the best statistics. So this is one example of why this feature-based process is very helpful, because it just allows you to quickly zero in on what's interesting and what you want to see and how to design a good visualization system around this. My work on this is mostly centered on so-called topological techniques. If you've never heard about topology, it's an area of mathematics that basically studies the similarity of objects up to smooth deformation. So if you have two objects, they're topologically equivalent if you can just deform them into each other without cutting or gluing anything. And we can use this actually to great effect without going into too much detail to visualize data. Because what we can do is use the notion of topological equivalence, right? Two data sets are similar structurally to come up with a much simplified representation of a very complex data set that is topologically equivalent, right? I have a very brief example here. There's again, something like a jet flow. There are vortices in there, and these features are all highlighted. But on the right-hand side, I have a very simple tree-like representation of this data set. But these two representations are topologically equivalent, right? So it's easy to derive the tree from the full data set topology. So using these techniques is a great way to abstract and simplify the structure of a complicated data set. I'm sorry, I didn't see it earlier.
But how is it different in genus comparison?
Genus comparison?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, so genus comparison would be sort of a special case of functional analysis, right?
What else? Get special features to try to match?
Give me 2 slides.
Just 2.
Actually, it's going to be 4. But see that we're short on time. I'm just going to skip over this example and get to the one that addresses your question. So what kinds of features are we looking at, for example, here? So in many applications, you can just say like, well, features are, some sort of what's called a super level set. So if you take all the values in your data and you identify the regions in which they are greater than some threshold, that would be the super level set. If you imagine a landscape, super level set would be things like mountains, right? All the points on a mountain rise above a certain height. So, we've looked at various applications with this, for example, something called viscous figuring, some fluid simulation examples, but also some examples from cosmology, where these things can be used to identify dark matter structures in cosmology simulations. So here's a slide that actually answers this. What we're looking at is sort of the topological structure of these super level sets, right? So imagine you have sort of this landscape with 4 mountain peaks here, A, B, C, D, right? And they have some structure. If you imagine building a model of that landscape and putting it in your bathtub, and you just start filling it with water, right? So the first thing that will disappear, kind of the outline of the terrain, that's this outermost gray line here. The second thing that will disappear is sort of that lowest mountaintop here. Then you only have these 2 here sticking out, and then from these 2 here, they will eventually become disconnected if you have the water high enough, because there's sort of a saddle point between these 2 things. And so we can turn this into a tree here that just represents the structure. Initially, I just have one super level set component. Then at this point, these 2 super level sets, this one super level set becomes 2. It splits into A and the rest. And then at a later stage, if the water rises higher, we get more splitting here. And so to answer your question, what we're interested in is, most of the time is sort of the number of connected components of the super level sets, but sometimes also sort of their higher order topological systems, like their some eddy numbers, things like that. In particular, we want to use this to understand how a data set changes over time. I showed you this complicated example with the vortex flow up front. And so what happens there is we get a lot of different features, and we want to understand how can we track them over time substantially. And so what we did here is kind of come up with sort of these merge trees and then find a way to represent these over time in the shape of a graph. Here's an even better example of the study of how an asteroid impacts in the ocean. Is a tsunami generated from this or not? This can also be phrased as a problem of analyzing super level sets. It's a very large data set, so it's hard to navigate in time and find out where are interesting occurrences, but using sort of a graph like this, which we call a nested tracking graph, and then a representation like this that encodes further information, it's much easier to navigate such a complicated data set. Okay. The second topic I want to look at in a little more detail is why is it so hard to work with large data? Why is it so crucial to find good algorithms to work with large data? And so parallel algorithms for large-scale data, that's one of the other focuses of my group. Clearly, if you have a terabyte of data or a petabyte of data, you cannot do this on your laptop. But nobody precludes you from actually using the supercomputer that computed the original data to also do the visualization, right? This is something that's called remote visualization. And there's plenty of software out there that does that. So for example, there's a visualization package called ParaView, and they have a node which is called ParaView Server, where you just run basically all the visualization on the compute nodes of your supercomputer, and then this is all collected in some front-end node, and the images are just shipped across your network to your local workstation, right? Great, sounds great. Cool. But that requires one thing of your visualization algorithms, namely that they are scalable, that they can actually make good use of these very large parallel machines. In a nutshell, what is a scalable algorithm? So if you imagine you have one processor to do the job, and you measure the time that it takes and call that T1, and then you take P processors to do the job, and you measure the time that these P processors take to finish the job, right? And then you think about sort of the investment of computing time, right? With one processor, you've only invested sort of here at the time T1, but with P processors, you can invest it, TP, but that P times, right? So if you think about this also as energy use, P processors use, P times the energy of one processor. So the overhead of such a parallel scheme is if you just take the time that all of these P processors spent together and and subtract the time that one processor will spend to do this, right? And so this is, in almost all cases, this number is bigger than, so P times TP is bigger than T1, for the simple reason that P processes working together need to coordinate somehow, and this coordination effort, like we need to communicate, for example, this coordination effort will take additional time and resources, right? So this is typically much larger, and the overhead is non-trivial, right? And you call an algorithm scalable if this overhead actually grows slowly, in a sense, as a function of P. So if the coordination effort between these P processors grows much slower than P itself. So typically you want this to grow at most linearly. Sublinear is perfect. So because that basically then means you can basically use, if you give it an arbitrary number of processes, you can actually use them to solve the problem, right? If, for example, the effort goes to infinity as you approach 1,000 processes, then you can never use more than 1,000 processes, which is then not a good thing. And given arbitrary large data, you could then actually solve the same problem. To give you an idea why this might be needed and why it's hard to parallelize these algorithms sometimes, let me give you sort of an idea of where this is particularly hard, namely in what's called vector field visualization or flow visualization, right? So the visualization of flowing fluids, flowing air, and so on. And one technique that is very popular there is drawing integral curves, which are just trajectories of fluid particles, right? I've plotted here two examples. Here's just 20,000 so-called streamlines, so just trajectories naively visualized in such a form. Here's a surface constructed out of such virtual particles. You can come up with all kinds of interesting ways to characterize features using these particles. But of course, was always kind of nice to look at. Is this video not what's always nice to look at is just some animations like these, where you just have a million particles flowing around and illustrating to you sort of the flow structures. At least this gives you a good first impression on how it is. There's another set of techniques that kind of uses these particles to do sort of derived analysis, observing their convergence and divergence behavior. These are so-called Lagrangian methods, and they are particularly challenging because the computational overhead is so large. What you can't see, because there's this thing down here below here, there's to make this this animation here is actually an innocuous little animation. We had to compute 5 billion virtual particles in a data set that was about 1 terabyte in size. So conceptually, this is very simple. Following these integral curves, you just basically go in little steps through your data and always look at sort of the direction that you need to take. And there's two canonical ways to parallelize this that any of you could think about at any time. You could say like, well, I have 3 processors and I have 3 curves to compute. Let me just distribute the 3 curves among these processors. So I give the yellow line to processor P0, I'm going to give the red line to processor P1, and the orange line to processor P2. And this will then give you a distribution of work. But since no processor can hold all of the data, your data is also in blocks, right? Here are 9 data blocks, and then the processors need to go ahead and read in the data as they do the computing. For example, P0 needs to read this block here first, and the second block, and the third block, and so on and so on. So this is not always optimal, because if you do this computation on a reasonably large data set, you find out that many processes are reading the same data blocks all the time, right? So they're doing a lot of redundant work there. If you actually look at sort of the computation, a lot of time in this algorithm is spent just doing computation, right? If you don't have more than 1 million curves, you can't use more than 1 million processors. The other way to distribute the work is to say like, well, we're not actually distributing the work, but let's distribute the data, right? Let's put as much data as we can on one processor. For example, we're going to give P0 these 3 yellow blocks here. We're going to give P1 the 3 red blocks here, and P2 is going to get the orange blocks, and then the data is in the memory of these processors. And then if the curve needs to be computed, only that processor that owns the data can actually do this computation, right? So P0 would be responsible for computing the first part of these upper 2 curves. P1 computes kind of a part of all 3 curves, and so it's P2. So that's another way of doing this, and then you can see, so the distribution is much nicer. The data up here is on P0 maybe, down here is on P1, and down here is on P3, and so you can see the curves are computed on these things. But in this setup, we can only use those processors whose data actually participates in the computation, right? If, you know, a processor has data and there's no curve there, if you compute it, it sits idle, it doesn't do anything. We can see this actually very nicely if we look at what's called a so-called Gantt chart that encodes the activity of a bunch of processors over time as this computation happens, right? So here's a sort of a run of this streamline computation with 128 processors. Wherever it's colored, they do something. For example, they do I/O, they read in the data, and this is all at the beginning because everybody reads their own little piece of data. Here they actually do integration work, so they actually work on propagating one of these curves. But the yellow and the green parts are just where they're communicating with each other, sending these curves around so that the curves always have the ground next to data. You can see most of this plot is white, which is really terrible because white means no work is being done, right? So of these 128 processors, you know, these guys here sit idle mostly all the time. They don't actually participate in anything, right? These guys down here do a little more work, but you know, after about half of the time, they're also done, right? So they have nothing to do. And there's only these two poor processors that need to kind of do most of the work, and everybody else just has to wait for them. Why is this the case? Well, probably, looking at the previous slide, probably all the curves ended up, you know, in one region, and then only the processors that had this data could actually work on this computation. You can improve the situation a lot by actually looking at the computation and rebalancing as it is happening. So you can avoid these really terrible imbalances where there's only one or two or a very small number of processes actually doing the computation. We did some work on that, but it's still not perfect. You still see this plot here has a lot of white space that is still hard to fill. So that's really not a very well solved problem up to this point. How to do this efficiently for very large data in parallel. So take-home message: parallelizing visualization algorithms can be very hard. It doesn't have to be very hard for all visualization algorithms. So, for example, there was a great paper in 2011 where Hui Ro and his colleagues from the Ski Institute in Utah showed that there's quite a sizable fraction of visualization algorithms that you can just map very well to MapReduce. If you work with data analysis, MapReduce, and if you want to use a bit of a very well understood parallelization approach that many data processing frameworks use. And if you can do that, you're basically home free. But if you can't, you have a hard problem. The thing is, you don't know upfront whether this is interesting. For example, in the turbine example, finding these vortices, that's the problem that you can do well in MapReduce. But finding the vortices that connect to turbines requires you to do these integral curves, and then you're back in the painful round. Right. So there's a bit of literature here that I've just put on the slide. People are slowly getting around to making community implementations of these parallel implementations, but it's still you're very much on your own still if you want to do this for complicated problems. Good. If you have such a problem, go ahead, download Polity or Visit. They get you about 80% of the work. Right. So what if this is still not good enough? So even if we have a great parallel algorithm, it may still take a long time to actually do its computations, like hours or maybe even days. What if we can't even store the data? So why can't we store the data? Well, if you look at the development of these supercomputers, there's a little statistics here. So in 2010, so the then state-of-the-art supercomputer had sort of computational power of 2 petaflops. And it could store data to disk, and this is really the interesting part. It has an aggregate memory of, what is this, 0.3 petabytes, and the I/O bandwidth, so the speed with which you can write to disk is 0.2 terabytes, right? So that sounds insanely fast, but it will still take a long time to write up this 0.3 petabytes. In 2018, for the new supercomputer summit, this has actually become much worse, because now it has sort of what is this system memory of 10 petabytes. So it's a lot more, but the I/O bandwidth hasn't scaled out so great. So we find ourselves more and more in a situation where it's easy to produce the data on a supercomputer, but it's not easy to hold on to it. It's not feasible to save it because the I/O would be too costly, right? You don't have the storage space and the time to actually write all of this stuff out. So that's a bit crazy. There's also some work that confirms this for visualization. If you look at one visualization algorithm that parallels particularly well, then you level set extraction, and you try to scale this up to more and more cores in order to make it go faster and faster. You see that the actual time being divided into 3 parts, namely how long do I need to read my data in, how long do I actually need to do the computation here in red, and how long do I need to do the rendering in green. Then you see the blue bar is always the biggest, meaning the I/O from disk, just reading the data from disks already takes a very long time. And this gets worse and worse because as we use more cores, our computation and rendering becomes faster and faster, but the I/O doesn't, right? So we can't do anything about the I/O problem. And we heard it this morning, 300 milliseconds is kind of the attention span that you have if you want to do really interactive analysis. So this is not feasible, right? Minutes or days, people just lose focus. It's very hard to do this. Of course, you can compress your data down, sometimes with good results, where you can just say like, well, I'm going to throw away everything that's not interesting about the data. For some data sets, you can come up with great compression schemes and visualization of that. That is a nice solution, but that only kind of usually gets you a factor, right? You compress your data by a factor of 10, so that basically defers the problem for another 3 years until the supercomputer has scaled up by a factor of 10. Really, what people have been trying to do as of late is to not actually preserve the data at all, but only preserve images of it, if you will, and then create browsable image databases. Browsable image databases where probably all the results you might ever want to look at, there's an image for that. You get a very large database of images, and then you can look at this after the fact to do exploration, right? This is called parallel cinema, for example. This whole approach of doing visualization while the data is in place, in situ, right? Not surprisingly called in situ visualization. And the question is, how do you do this intelligently? Why does it even make sense to store these images? Well, imagine your data set has, I don't know, 100 gigabytes per time step or something. In 100 gigabytes, you can store a lot of images, especially if they're JPEG, even high resolution images, right? Whoever is a photographer and has 10,000 images on their hard drive knows that you can fit a lot of images even within one gigabyte or something. So if we make a lot of images, is that enough? It's just storing these images and making them browsable. I can store images from all kinds of different vantage points. I can store images from all kinds of different parameters. Is that enough? Well, the problem with this is this works really well for some examples, but not for others. Not for others, because you don't know a priori what kinds of things you want to be looking at, right? This kind of counteracts this whole exploration aspect of visualization. You can't really explore anymore because you only have a set of fixed options. And then storing too many images is again a problem. So here's again sort of a short overview of how this works. So classically, you would have sort of your simulation code. I put an equation up here to simulate this. There's a theoretical model. You have a simulation code which stores its data on disk, and you load the data from disk, for example, with ParaView and make visualizations. In an in situ workflow, you kind of put sort of the visualization code within the simulation code. You co-locate them on the same machine, and the only thing that gets stored to disk are images, basically. But again, the interaction is very limited. So what can we do about this? Is there maybe some way to store smart images? Well, yes, it turns out we can sort of find a middle ground, right? There are these two extremes. On the one hand, you keep all the data, you have full flexibility for exploration. On the other hand, you keep only the images, and you have very limited flexibility for exploration, but very small size also. Is there sort of, where's the middle ground? What are the trade-offs in the middle that we can use to do this? And one of the things we did, for example, was to use, again, topological analysis, without going into too much detail, to store what we call layered depth images, where we basically have not only one image per viewpoint of this data set, but basically, if you will, one image per feature in this data set, right? And this gives us a lot of small images from which we can reconstruct the entire data set. And we can simplify this aggressively in situ. For example, of the 1.5 million vertices we had originally, we can just say that, well, we only care about the 100 most prominent ones, and then store only the images for these guys. And this gives us a lot of data reduction, 95% on average, but we can still preserve some flexibility for exploration later. So, for example, we can mask out the features, we can select these are the ones we want, these are the ones we don't want, and so on and so on, because we have these individual images, right? So this is a very straightforward example on how you can build sort of a middle ground between no flexibility, small data, and full flexibility, overwhelming data, right? You can also apply this to, for example, figure out which, which streamlines do you want to show in such a data set. Then you have all these images and you can composite them together to actually make the final visualization that you want. And this provides you with sort of a limited amount of flexibility, which, however, might be good enough than no flexibility at all. Right? Yeah, sure.
You said using information theory. What do you mean by that?
This is actually not from my group. So information theory, you can encode how much the information content of these different images is, right?
You mean like compress them and see?
For example, compress them and see, or Shannon entropy or something like that. And then you just select the ones that have the most entropy. That's one very easy way of going about it. You can, of course, also measure the entropy in the data and then look at how much of that is expressed in the images. There are several metrics to do this.
The images, allow metric images to be inclusion. Doesn't that distort things?
Sure, but for example, if you have the right perspective, occlusion might not matter so much. And this is what you're looking for using this approach.
This is not only very unidirectional, it's also very
yeah, very. So some of these streamlines are totally uninteresting because they're straight lines, right? Others kind of are captured in vortices, so those are maybe the ones you want to see. They carry a lot more information about the data if you want.
Sorry if you got a question, but doesn't that make it so you don't have a context? So you might just get the streamlines and you see these pictures in the middle of space. There's nothing around you telling you kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. That is not always what you want, right? But the context can also be overwhelming. For example, if I immediately put a bunch of streamlines in there, so I just get this, right, where I can't see the vortex to do occlusion, right? And there's all kinds of cleverness that you can apply to this. For this, I just put up, I think, the find on this. The problem is really always identifying in situ what's going to be interesting to somebody later. And that's kind of, grasping at straws like information theory to kind of figure out things that have unusual properties in some general sense, if you will. Make sense? Right. Yeah, we can also use this to select interesting data subsets and store only these. So, for example, in this torus data here, I think it's from a fusion simulation. Actually, it's from a jet engine simulation. We can omit the part that doesn't actually contain any features, right? So people are trying to be creative in finding out how can we solve this conundrum between, all the data takes too long, no data, only images. Where is this flexibility thing in the middle? And this is very much active research, and there's no great consensus on what the right things are. So this already brings me to the sort of the conclusion, if you will. So I gave you an idea of how modern data sets, what challenges they pose for visualization. And I hope you got the message that this is by no means a straightforward undertaking. So of course there's visualization software, but if you push the boundaries, chances are it's not going to help you much. There's a lot of research going on right now on which techniques are general enough to apply to a large class of data sets. For example, you have methods that work only for flow visualization as well, but can we also apply them, I don't know, to fusion and astrophysics research, and that's unclear. Things we need to be looking at in order to make these methods better are sort of the visual scalability. Can they actually give us something that we can even visually understand, right? Not millions of things, but thousands of things or hundreds of things better. Cognitive scalability, can we actually formulate hypotheses on data of this kind of a complexity? And finally, computational scalability, right? So can we find algorithms that actually allow us to do this fast enough so we can even address these classes. So this is sort of a typical case where sort of the input side of visualization, the computational science, scaled very well, very early, and now everybody is kind of struggling to catch up with the rest of the pipeline, mainly data analysis in the back end. There are many things I could have talked about also today. Things like, for example, ensemble analysis. If you run the same simulation multiple times with multiple parameters, what are the similarities, what are the differences? A very challenging and hard problem. Nevertheless, very relevant. How to express uncertainty in visualization. How to go about analyzing these data sets that have thousands of variables. How do you even start thinking about this? Right. Those are all very challenging problems. But nevertheless, the research is very interesting, and there are sort of great results being put out every day. Okay, and with this, I'm at the end. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Chris, thank you very much for a great talk. I really appreciated especially the part where you were going from more scientific visualization into more info-based area. That's a perfect segue to my talk. I was very interested because you were talking about like extremely large amounts of data. And then you also mentioned this pipeline which you're going tracking features to actually make it feasible. Can you talk a little bit about the sizes on how you're shrinking, or not shrinking, like filtering the data, and what sizes do you have at each step during that process? I would be very curious to see.
Yeah. Let me maybe use the wind turbine example as an example. So the data is, by today's standards, it's almost small. It's about 200 gigabytes of force simulation data. So the raw data that comes out of the simulation is about 200 gigabytes, right? And then you can extract all these vortices, and that discards about 70% of the data, right? So about 30% of the data's features. If you only choose to represent them by their boundaries, and you do some further simplification, I venture you end up with, I don't have the numbers super tight, but it would be about 1 million triangles, right? Maybe about 10 to 20,000 individual vortices, right? And then what's this? And then you find the interesting ones, and then all of a sudden it gets to 500, and over these 500 you do statistics, and then so that's sort of the progression. So I think you're looking to lose several orders of magnitude per research. Does that answer your questions? Perfect.
Some other question?
What's about it?
Okay. I thought that was somebody else. Just wondering how dependent is the type of research that you're doing to current developments in the GPU general programming, everything, because, well, they are trying to come up with several advances, and in some way the model is nice, but at the same time it's very rigid.
The GPU model, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say from a high level, more theoretical computer science point of view, GPUs are a non-issue, right? Of course, in practice, we're looking to kind of use every advantage that we can get. And there are some algorithms in visualization that are just like the rendering algorithms that the GPUs were originally developed for, that are perfect on a GPU. For example, volume rendering, making volumetric images of data, that's basically shooting a lot of rays through the data, which is an embarrassingly parallel problem, right? So you can use this to great effect in some things, but as sort of the supercomputers become more GPU heavy and sort of more multi-core, the boundaries start blurring a bit, and it's not clear whether GPUs, it's unlikely they have a huge architectural advantage, right? It's tweaking the constants, but not tweaking the scalability. Tweaking the constants is important enough, right? If you can reduce the time from 10 seconds to 10 milliseconds, it's awesome. But again, this just defers the problem a couple of years down the pipeline, because you get to this one-time constant factor that you're reducing your time, but scalability will eventually bite you in the behind anyways.
Okay, thank you, Christoph,
Thank you.
for your excellent talk. Right now, Professor Jean Alexis Guerra will talk some minutes about the visual analytics field and its activities and our expectation about the near years about this front of research.
Perfect. So let me see if I can get everything running. I can actually share this. Share the screen. Let's go see that. All right. No problem. It's good, perfect. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Chris, again, for a great presentation. It's actually a perfect segue into my talk. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about visual analytics and the work we have been doing inside Imagine's group. I wonder why this is showing so dark. Oh, I see. See, sorry for all the inconveniences, but getting this to work on the streaming, it's a little complicated. Let's see if I can. This one. Perfect. Get back to it. So basically what I'm going to be talking today, and by the way, if you guys want to see these slides, they are interactive and you can actually see them on your phones or on your computers. You just need to visit my Twitter page. So if you just go to Twitter/Duto_Guerra, as you can see here, you can see the link to the slides and also to the streaming that we are using right now, and that is giving us so much trouble. So what I'm going to be doing today, if I can make this thing work, is just talking a little bit more about making sense of data. So this is also a visualization talk, but it's more of that second part that Chris was mentioning in his first part of the talk, basically about how to get information out of, or knowledge out of, like complex data sets. What I work on is on the smaller data sets, but a little bit more complex, you could say, in a way, in the sense that most of the things that Chris mentioned and what people do in scientific visualization, it's usually geospatial data, like vortex data, things that change over time. So usually those are your main dimensions, and because of that, you have very specific techniques you can use. In my case, I work in different types of data, in the sense that they don't have a real life representation, things like that. So usually when you have those type of data, you can run different type of techniques for doing that. So if you have seen my talks in the past, you have seen me talking about this many times. These are different techniques you can use to analyze those types of data. So let me do just one final thinking here, just to make sure that this is showing the right one. I think it should be good. There. So basically, the first thing you could do is just do data mining or machine learning. That is the typical thing and the cool thing to be doing right now. So everyone is with AI and seeing how AI can change the world. But usually what happens in there is that if you have a user that has a complex data set, that user will come with that data, and then it will give it to you, and you will try to apply your favorite hammer to try to extract things from that. So being that TSNE or deep learning or whatever convolutional network you like the best, and things like that. The problem with that is that usually many people don't really understand these models. Like actually, like There's some saying that nobody really understands what these things are doing, and nobody really understands why they work, although they're just simply statistics and math. And most people look at those things as like black boxes. And the problem with that is that you get your data, you give it to an analyst, and this analyst that is not the same user, so they don't really know exactly what are the tasks at hand. That is the first thing that Chris mentioned from Tamara's framework. What they do is that they just apply their favorite tool, and what they get is outliers, correlations, and clusters, and things like that. And when they try to show this to the final user, the problem is that the user is like, well, that's not really what I was looking for. Then the other problem is that if you're applying this, usually it will take a lot of time for processing, for training the model. So every time you apply it or you want to present that result, it will always have to take like a week or something of work. So if you go and present this to the final stockholder, the person that actually has the questions, they will say, oh, that's interesting. Can you also tell me that, but only about this piece of data? So usually what will happen is that they will have to go back to the analyst, wait for another week, and then come back with a new result. By that moment, the expert, the person that actually needs to make the decisions, will be like, I already forgot what we were talking about. So that because of that, this problem can be complicated, especially when the analyst is not the same user. So there is a different technique that you can apply that is called information visualization. And the whole key here is that what we do in InfoVis is that the same user come to a random hands-on analyst that you can see here, and basically they just give you the data. We make a very user-centric design. We actually try to understand what are those features that Chris was talking about, and then we use perceptually accurate representations, as Chris was showing, that the user, without having any knowledge in data analysis, data science, or not even knowing how to run an SQL query, can understand what's happening on the data. The advantage of doing this is that you have a one way in which the user can understand what's happening in there, but on top of that, they can also interact with the data. They can go and query and say, like for instance, of those turbines, and they have like 500 turbines in there, and then they say, well, can you show me only the data of turbine number 23? Because for some reason there is something that is not making sense in there. Then they can click on that and they can zoom and filter along in the visualization mantra to only get the details on the map of that specific one. So that is a key part because they can actually ask questions, generate hypotheses, and test those hypotheses really quickly. Whereas when in the machine learning model, the problem is that you only have a one way of communication. So you are pretty much accepting what they are telling you. However, this model with all of the hands-on analysts and all of that, it still has some problems. And is that if you give that model something like the data sets that Chris usually handles, then there is not enough amount of pixels on the screen that you can actually represent like those 2 terabytes of information. And on top of that, we humans, we cannot really process that much amount of information if you just show all of that at once. So the problem with this is that it doesn't scale up in the same way that machine learning does. So what we do in visual analytics is that we combine those InfoVis techniques with algorithms. So basically we put those tools in here in the back of the visualization. That is pretty much a different representation of what Chris was mentioning. We use that to extract the features and the characteristics that the user cared about, and then we use the visualization to represent that to the user with the added and very important feature that the user can ask questions. And then the key is, and that's why Chris is working in all of those techniques on how to actually do the processing faster, such that I can actually ask about that 23rd turbine and then get the results of that in hopefully less than 300 milliseconds. That is when the user will want to have those results. So with that, basically you have different pros and cons for each one of those techniques. If you just use like traditional statistics, I'm going to show you a classical example that we use in visual analytics all the time. And the problem with traditional statistical techniques is that they aggregate too much the information and you're losing like context of what's happening in there. Then you also have the machine learning models, and the problem with those is that usually you don't have the human in the loop, and that people don't really know what those things are doing, but they have the super pro advantage that it's extremely scalable. And actually, with the current developments, those things are doing amazing stuff. So the final thing is the InfoVis. That is what I just showed you. That gives you the ability to interact with the data, but at the same time, it's not as scalable as the other. So let me show you an example of why we should visualize. So this is the classical one for those of you that have seen it. Don't ruin it for everyone else. But let's just do a simple data science exercise here. So you have a very simple data set. It's not super big data. It's not like terabytes of data. But still, we have 4 measurements, and for each one of those, we have identified 2 variables, X and Y. And the question is, can you guys tell me something interesting in that data set? What can you see in there? Anyway, I know, like doing this, it's the first step of data analysis. Can anyone see any pattern? Are those the same? Are those different? How is the relationship between the different data sets? Like for instance, let me give you an example. Did you guys see this one? Yes? Like, do you see that most of them are 8s, and then you have like a weird 19 in there? Then you also see, like for instance, these values are the same value across the first 3 elements. So you could say, well, that's just the basics, but what if you just run, like for instance, statistics on that? Like let's just run the basic statistics. And this is the interesting thing about this data set, and is that if you just run the basic statistics on it, and of course this is like abusing statistics, but if you just run those basic statistics, they have the same mean and the same variance and the same correlation for X and Y. So pretty much what the statistics is telling us in there is that those 4 data sets are pretty much the same thing. So now I will ask you just for 3 seconds of attention of your brains, and then you can continue chatting on Snapchat or whatever you millennials do nowadays. So look at this for a second, and take a look at this. I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3 seconds, and then let me go back. Can you guys tell me what you saw in there? Can you describe what you saw in there? Like the first questions, are those 4 data sets the same thing? No. What did you guys see in there? How would you describe it? Anyone?
Different behaviors being about.
Say that?
Different behaviors.
There were different behaviors. Like what type of behaviors? So I saw someone in there doing like this. What other behaviors did you see? I told you, like there's one that is completely like that. There was one that was a string. There was like a lot of noise. So those things, you actually gathered all of that information because our brains were trained, and actually that's why we were able to evolve, because thanks to these things, we were able to identify the tigers that were coming to eat us. So we could run faster, or not faster, but we can run before they can actually reach us to the point that we could run anymore. But as you can see here, this is a very simple data set. And we were running like a linear regression, and we were actually screwing up, because if you just take a look at, for instance, this example in here, actually what we're doing in there is that we're running a linear regression that is telling us that there is a tendency for the increase, whereas you can clearly see that that thing is going down. Where like there's other ones like this one that is like a little bit more scattered, and it kind of makes sense to have used that. Like for instance, this is an example that I really like. So when you get your PhD, you have a very tiny footnote that most people don't know outside the logia of the PhDs, and is that if you get a data set like this, you're entitled as a PhD to remove that data point so you can publish your paper. Because otherwise it's like, what the heck? I mean, if you take a look, like everything is going perfectly, and all of a sudden you have that thing in there. Most probably there was a problem with the measurement system that you were using, but more seriously, and things like that. And then this is the more interesting example I want to say. This is clearly, like that seems like a politician trying to arrange things in a way, and actually you can see examples of that. Like you can see, like for instance, in sports, that people have actually start including into the population like high-performing athletes, just to have a tendency of the increase. So the most interesting thing, and this is very classical, and everyone that has seen any of these first most probably has seen this, but there has been a very recent development by Adobe that they did like a paper a couple of years ago, where all of these data sets in here, including the star, the X, and all of that crappy thing in there, all of them have exactly the same statistics than the 4 ones that we saw before. And the most interesting one, like there is this dinosaur. has exactly the same statistics. And by the way, I included that in there because there was research that says that if you include a dinosaur in your visualizations, people will remember your work better. So now you will remember means you cannot get this talk out of your head anymore. But that's exactly the same statistics. So as you can see in there, with very small data, even with that simple data, if you just run a model and you just run a statistic processing there without visualizing, even with something as simple as this, you could be making assumptions and mistakes that you shouldn't be doing. So the take-home message in there is just visualize your stuff. So basically what we look for in information visualization is what Chris was talking, and we would like to define that as insights. An insight is something that requires a deep understanding of the problem that actually is meaningful, that is not obvious, and is actually actionable. So the example I love giving in here is that, for instance, I went it has to be like 3 years ago to a big data meeting here in Colombia, and there was this guy that was giving like a very interesting talk about network analysis, and he has made a master on that, and he had also studied how to do visualizations, and he was super proud of that. He spent like 2 years studying a master's on it. He actually convinced people to give him all the financial data of Colombia to him. So he had analyzed like 20 years worth of data of financial transactions. And after doing all of that and computing like super advanced metrics that he learned in his master's, like getting the eigenvector centrality and between centrality and doing fancy charts, he was able to discover that in Colombia, the biggest bank is Bancolombia. So that is kind of like saying that in the US bank is kind of the biggest ones. It's kind of nice, it's actually based on data, and it's kind of meaningful, but it's completely obvious. Everyone knows that, and you didn't need to do all of that analysis to actually get that. And there's actually the most important one, is that you cannot really take any decisions on that. So one of the key parts of this is that at the end, those insights should make you happier or get you more money or whatever is your purpose in life. So it's not really doing things because. So how do we do this in visual analytics? We do, in our group, we apply a lot of techniques in information visualization, data science. We have to build some systems, as Chris was mentioning too. And most importantly, as Paulo was asking before, we run a lot of evaluation with users. So at the end, we want to see if users can actually get something out of what we are doing. These are some of the techniques that we use, so I'm not going to bore you with that. Because the most interesting thing that I want to show you here is this, the thing that I'm very proud of, is the team of students that have been working on this semester. And actually, as you can see in there, they are working in a very diverse area of research. So you can see the individual projects of this if you just go and look in my website. So basically, the interesting thing in here is that they are working in the intersection of information visualization, with some of them working in large data visualization that is not yet like the size that Chris works, but it's larger than what you can fit on a browser, just to say something. We are also doing some things in info-based testing. We are going to start with that. Also in photo visualization and temporal visualization. And finally, we also have some appendix in there of some other research work that is really interesting to me. That is the work of accessibility, how to work things, how to make things work for people on our field. So let me actually see if I can get into the next slide for this. So let's start with my master's students that I just graduated this semester. So the first one I want to talk is Nicole Basurto. She graduated back in December last year, and she came up with an idea of creating a framework that will help us run like unit testing and automated testings for doing information visualization. So one of the problems with doing this is that when you're visualizing things on the web, usually what you want is to have a lot of interactions, such as having to click, having to hover your mouse, zooming in, or dragging stuff, or doing all of those things. And not only there are not current systems that allow you to do those things, but on top of that, there's also specific things that we care about in visualization. Those are the marks and the channels that you use to represent that information. So when you're doing that, actually, if you take a look at the best solution that you have nowadays, if you're in the software testing field, you can see that there is something called visual regression testing. And what visual regression testing does is that you create a baseline of your application. That application, the visual regression testing system, such as Backtop.js, what it does is that it will take a picture of that, literally a screenshot of that. It will save that screenshot, and then you continue your development. And then when you have a new version, you get a new screenshot and you compare the image with the previous one. On top of that, you can also test for things like clicking, or I think you can do two things, only click or hover. I think it's the two things. But in order for you to understand this, you have to be able to write a script in a headless browser engine that is pretty much like running like Chrome or something like that, but without opening Chrome. You have to modify backstop to include the new tags that you need for specific elements that you do in visualization. And finally, you have to modify the resemble engine, that is the one that does the image comparison, to actually make sure that it's finding what you want to find. So if you didn't understand any of these, pretty much no database developer does either. So because of that, no one actually uses this. So our idea was, we want to be able to write tests in a natural way. And what Nicole did with Backbase, it was exactly that. So here is a very simple example. I don't have time to go in details in this. But if you have a simple bar chart like this, and then you want to test that when you move the mouse or you hover over the bars, it changes the color, then you just need to write like these 7 lines or 8 or whatever number is in there, lines of code. You say that you name the test that you want to do. You see where the application is running. So usually what you see here is that it's running locally in my local machine. Then you say that you have a class called bar that represents each one of the bars. You see, you also want to say what is the different configurations you want to run for. So in this case, we're testing for a phone and a tablet, which have different resolutions. We could change the behavior, and then you see what is the action that you're applying and what you want to check. And that's all you need to write. So basically with it, what Nicole did was to create all of the scripts in Backstop. So for the most common visualization interactions and techniques and the marks and channels, such that you can write those things test more easily, and it's open source and you can actually test it on your website. What do you get when you test that? And actually the projector is not really helping much in here, but basically it gets the baseline that I mentioned before, and then depending on what you're testing for, in this case we're testing for color and changes in color and shape. And basically it is telling us that there's 2 tests that are being failing and what are the things that have been changing. So that way you can have like an automated framework that actually tests for those things. And that is Nicole's Mazurto work. After that, with a different student, with Meili Vanegas, what we did is to actually work, and this is changing gears a lot. This is like visualizing biological data. So this one is quite complicated, but basically imagine that like what biologists do right now is that they want to discover, especially the ones investigating bacteria, they want to discover new organisms that people didn't know about before. So what they do is that they run a DNA analysis, and they test how different is that DNA that they got from the DNAs of the databases that we already know of in science. So for that, they use a lot of tools that actually do all of this computation for them. And usually what they get as a result is a list that will contain, like imagine a Google search that will give you like 500 results. And for each one of those results, you have a full tree of life telling you how similar is that new thing that you learned, that supposed new thing, to the things that already exist. And usually what people have to do with this is that they have to figure out if it is actually a new thing. And because it's so much information, it's so difficult to understand, and the only thing they get is a textual representation, what they usually do is that they only look at the first result. And then whatever is on the second page of Google, they're not taking a look at. What is the problem of that? Well, it has happened in the past that people have been like investigating if, for instance, something was a bacteria, and then they run a test on an organism, and then actually it showed that there was the bacteria in there. But actually the DNA was the DNA of a shrimp that was infected with the bacteria. And because one researcher like actually said that it was the bacteria, this error started propagating, because that was the first result that you will get in the results. Even though if the first result was the only one that was saying the bacteria, and all the other 500 results were saying that it was a shrimp, people still say that it was a bacteria because they weren't looking at the organism. So what Meili did in here was creating a visual analytics tool that actually allowed you to compare one sequence with many other sequences that you get from the results. And even better, if you have more than one, you can actually test that too. So here's an example of what she does. Let me actually fast forward so we can actually have enough time. Usually what you do in here, like in this case, like doing a comparison of one organism versus multiple taxonomic results, usually what she do is that she goes and use an identification that is standard across this type of research. You can see actually here the result using a tool called, she's getting the ID from that, and actually her tool goes and connects with the standard tools that exist right now, and then creates this visualization. And what you can see in this visualization, that it's a little bit dense, is that it's telling you how similar is that organism with all the other organisms that you have on the database. So the first thing that you can see in here is that this one that you cannot really read in there is the one that has the highest percentage of matching. You can actually see that she's selecting that in there. Then she's saying, I don't want to see anything that is under, like, let's say 77%. And then you can see that only one survives to that filter. She can keep on going and say, well, let me see things that are like 16% or things like that. And then she gets more results. That is for comparing only one. But what happens if you didn't analyze only one organism? What happens if you analyze multiple organisms? So when you do that, she actually creates this. And she starts representing first a dendrogram in here that you can use to navigate and see only certain areas of the taxonomic tree. You can also see a multifaceted view in here that is actually showing you what are the ones that are similar depending on the different colors. And then you have this funky animation that is actually switching between the different representations such that you can actually get an idea of how similar those things are. And in this case, she's representing, I think, 120 different organisms, comparing those with the millions of organisms that you have on the results. So of course, we don't have enough time to actually go into the details, but you can actually check my website for more information about it. Okay, so switching gears again, this is the other work that I actually mentioned earlier when we were doing the poster's description. We have created a visualization widget that allows any person to actually analyze multivariate large data sets without even having to know how, just by knowing how to drag a mouse. So let me show you where this thing started. So this thing that you guys see in here is a visualization called Network Explorer that I created, if I can get to interact with this. That I created a while ago when I was doing network analytics. So I had a big data sets for finding fraud, waste, and abuse in California. In here, I cannot show you that data because it's highly sensitive, but this is like, for instance, my Facebook data when Facebook was cool and let you actually get information from the network for research purposes. Before Cambridge Analytica and all the scandal that actually ended up for them like cutting access for us researchers to the data, and then the only ones that can do those type of analysis are themselves.
What is it showing?
Each one of those, that's a great question, thank you, Daniel. Each one of these is one of my Facebook friends, and then it's showing a relationship between my friends, like who of them are actually connected. So in here, it's actually quite dense, but one of the things in here, I don't know if you can actually see, but this is the highest node that I have, and that is my wife. So thankfully, she's the one that is connected the most with the rest of my Facebook friends. Otherwise, it would have been a little bit weird and I would be a little bit in trouble. So when I hover over that, you can see who is she connected with. And then what I did in there is that I actually cluster each one of my friends into different groups that are highly connected. And this is extremely interesting, and I didn't want to go into details of that, but this is extremely interesting about my personal life, because actually what you can see in here are all my friends from Pereira. All of these ones in here are my friends from my Fulbright Special Scholarship. These are all the friends from my regular Fulbright Scholarship that I went to a seminar. You can see that, for instance, this person is the only one that went to the seminar with me and also had the Special Fulbright Scholarship. So it's actually telling a lot of my personal life. In the space of California fraud, waste, and abuse, we wanted to find like clusters of people doing bad stuff. The interesting thing in here is that when you see all of this information, sometimes you want to see only some of the parts that are inside each one of those clusters. So let's say that I want to see only this cluster, including my Facebook, my Fulbright friends. And what you see in there is that I just jumped into the cluster. So that's pretty much what we call zoom and filter, and then you get more details on demand. I went from 760 nodes to 31 nodes. And those are very highly connected, as you can see in that hairball in there. But I can actually rerun clusters in there and see inside those who are the ones that are mostly connected. And this is very interesting because you actually get to see like the people that were hanging out a lot together. And then you can then say, oh, I'm only interested in this subcluster, that it's a subcluster from the other cluster, and basically jump into that amount of information. The reason why I'm showing this, because this is not yet talking about Naviyo, is that when I was doing this, like explaining this alone was very complicated. So I needed to give people something that would allow them to understand that I was jumping into a cluster and then into another cluster. So that's why I designed this widget that you see in here. It's a static widget, but it's telling me that out of the 760, I went into 31, and then from those, I went into 5. And if I jump back into the second clusters, you can see those in here, and then you can see that we went back. And then I can select like this bigger cluster, and then jump into that, and then you see that we went into from 31 into 12, and which ones were the ones that we had. So that was useful for them, but then we had the idea, well, this is interesting, I wonder if we could do more with that. So what we started doing is saying, well, what if we create some interactions in there? When people were looking at this, they were saying, well, I have that network, but I want to see only these green clusters. So I only want to see this, or I want to see these ones in here. There are the first ones, like for instance this one, so I can see only the subset of the clusters. Or I want to see the ones with the highest number of these sequential variable that you have in here. Or more interesting, I want to resort things, for instance, by group. And then I want to see only this cluster, and then the other cluster. And then from this one, I want to see only these ones in here, and then got the same interactions by having direct manipulation on the other one. So we tested that, and that was very interesting. And then we started saying, well, let's try to see that with a real case scenario. So this is all the voting patterns that we have had in Colombia since we established a rule that for the Colombian Senate that actually measures how senators vote in there. And as you can see in here, we have 172,000 votes, and we have many different variables. That's why you have that sancocho of colors in there. But the interesting thing is that if you actually pay a lot of attention in here and you put your glasses on for Tiberio, you can actually see here, because Tiberio is the one that always complains that this thing is too small, and it is true. So I can actually select by different periods, and you can see since this is data from 2006 and the senators served for 4 years, you can see we have data from 2006 to 2009. And the nice thing is that I can actually select that, and you can see that in less than 300 milliseconds, I'm only seeing the senators and how they are voting with other senators in the Colombian Senate. So these are the ones from 2006, and then I can see the ones between 2010 and 2013. And then you can also see, let's see our current senators. So if we actually click on here, we can see that we are going from 172,000 votes to only 85,000 votes. And then from there, we can sort by a different thing, in this case, the corporation. So we have in Colombia, Cámara de Representantes and Senate. So you can actually say, I only want to see the first selection of the Cámara de Representantes, and then I only want to see the Senate. So I'm actually, if you were doing, like for all of those of you computer scientists out there, like start thinking like how much SQL or Mongo or Python or Pandas you will have to write just to get these data sets. And in here, a person only knowing how to click and drag can actually get that. And actually it's very interesting because you get your first insight. If you actually start looking in here, you start seeing that Colombia, there's 3 types of senators. Those to vote like to one of the extremes, those to vote to the other extreme, and those that are in the middle that actually vote like kind of in the same way. And remember, what you're looking at in here, each node is a senator, and then there is a link between those 2 senators if they have voted a certain amount of times together. And here is the interesting thing. So you can actually start preparing your awesomeness meter, because what I'm going to do is that I'm only going to show those that are voted more than 10, 15, 20, 29, 40, 50, 60, 70. And if you keep on going and looking at that cell, there is something interesting that is happening. And by the way, color represents the party. So when I stop in there, let me actually go a little bit forward. So when I stop in there, you start seeing like something that looks like a biological behavior. And it's like that party in here, it's a party that is actually voting very closely together. And when you start looking at the names of that, you can see, and if you're Colombian, you'll know what party is that. So El Centro Democrático is the only party in Colombia that actually votes as a party, because the rest of the senators, as you can see, all of these in here, they actually is the sancocho that we were talking about. They just vote with everyone, so there's not really coalition in there. Now, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a couple interesting things in there. And is that the people from El Centro Democrático, they only vote with people from El Centro Democrático, with an exception of 3 senators. Can you guys see them in there? And those 3 are actually, in this case, it's 4. If I actually go a little bit further, then there you go. There you have these 3. So if you actually go and see, you have that Jaime Alejandro Amin, Fernando Nicolás, and Álvaro Uribe Vélez are the only ones in the Centro Democrático that actually vote a lot with other senators. So everybody is really close, tight to the party, but Álvaro Uribe Vélez. So I will let you do your conclusions.
I don't know about the politicians, but how much of this is pre-programmed search criteria versus a discovery tool? Right, there's 2 things, right? Where you don't know anything, so you are a politician who wants to find this, or you're a geek, then of course you can do tools, right? Where are you aiming? How would you answer that?
So if I understand the question correctly, my answer will be I had no idea this was happening. So I had no idea the Centro Democrático was the one that were actually like having this pattern. What I had was the data that the nice people from Congreso Visible have gathered and had no idea what to do with. And the interesting about that is that their data, if you go and apply your black box of network visualization, usually what you will get from there, it's having 172,000 voting patterns, you get this result that you see in here. And as you can see in there, that's pretty much a really bad error. So what I'm kind of showcasing in here is that Naviyo, that is the widget on the left, combined with advanced visualizations like the one that you have on the right, lets you do some exploratory analysis to actually ask the questions that you care about. Like, for instance, if you don't want to do the analysis the way I did it, which will be telling the story if I understood your question correctly, you could start like from here. You can say, across all the data that we have, I want to see how the Centro Democrático actually votes in there. And actually, you can see only the votings for the Centro Democrático. So if I understood correctly your question, and please follow up if I didn't, it's not that much of pre-programmed query because I had no idea that's what was in there. And actually, every time I show this, we actually discover new things because people immediately start asking new questions. So when you have a visualization tool that gets you more questions than the ones you had at the beginning, you're doing something right.
So what is the, sorry, I didn't hear this part. What is the logic of the question? Is it like an SQL ends and ors you can do, or fields, or?
I guess one way of presenting this is that if you're a data analyst and you know your favorite language, you know R, or you know pandas, or you have this in a database, and you know you're an expert on SQL, then you could do kind of this type of analysis by running your advanced techniques in there. What Naviyo does is that it allows you to do that without knowing either R or Python or pandas or things like that.
Maybe a related question is, we need analysis to query this type of interface. So how can we measure the skills that you were a user of this visualization?
So actually what we do in there, and that's a perfect question for actually going into my students' work, is that, well, we have another visualization in here that represents the same with different type of data, in this case photos. So I can, for instance, see all the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art photos from Americans. And then after looking at that, I can see the gender distribution on that and only see, for instance, the ones from female artists and things like that. And then what we did is that Juan Guillermo Murillo, that you see here, he created a tool on top of Naviyo, which, by the way, is an open source library that anyone that knows a little bit of JavaScript can include in their visualization, such that they can have these faceted search type of techniques. And he created a tool called Shipyard. And basically, the idea in Shipyard is that you can get your own data and actually drop it in here. And as long as it is on JSON or CSV format, and it actually can fit on the browser. So sorry, Chris, your 2 terabytes are not going to work yet, because that's the other thing we're working on. Then basically, in a very quickly way and an easy to use interface, you can get into this part. So what we did, and what Juan Guillermo and Juan Camilo did for their research, is to run experiments on how people actually were able to understand this. And one of the things we found in there is that it's definitely not a super intuitive visualization widget. It requires some training. So, but it's still, when people actually got the grasp on how to use it, it was way more powerful than having to run the traditional ways of fixing these things. That is pretty much having a Google search interface with a bunch of side widgets to actually filter on things. So we are actually very hopeful with this, and we think it can be a very useful tool. But the thing we found running the experiments, which is the answer to your question, you just run the experiments with people, with your target audience, then is that it's actually useful and they see value on this. Yes?
How do you make representation task?
Oh, so actually that's one of the interesting things in here. Like different to what Chris was explaining, since we are working in smaller data sets in here, we don't really do much pre-processing. So one of the things that Juan Guillermo does in Shipyard is that he identifies and that he is actually color coding things that are dates, as you can see here, in a different way than things that are gates, as you can see here, that is a categorical variable. That's pretty much the only pre-processing. And that's one of the very nice things about this. With this, we were actually able to test with some data sets that we got from the Center for Big Data, CAOA, here in Los Andes. We got data sets of, let's say, 200 or 300 megabytes, I think, and we loaded that in there. And we immediately were able to find missing values and that they were close to each other. So with that, and actually, you can see an example of that here on the MoMA example. And is that when you see the data in the way that it actually came with, can you see this hole in here? So those are the height and the width of the pieces. If you select that part, you immediately start realizing that there's a hole in my data that is about like 4,000 elements that didn't have any width or height. And you can actually select those and see which ones are those. So the value proposition of this is also on the fact that every time I get a new data set, the first thing I do is open Shipyard, start getting angry with Juan Guillermo because he hasn't fixed some bugs he has in there. But after that, load it in Shipyard and then being able to start seeing how the data looks like, and then do some basic explorations, even before loading it into Pandas, into R, and things like that.
Currently, this framework working static files and static data, so making the scalable training.
So let me answer the first question first. Like for the streaming data, how do you work with this? The nice thing is that you can either use it with Shipyard with static files, but you can also use it as a widget, a programming widget. So if you just run your code and you write a simple JavaScript file that it's less than 10 lines of code, you can program all the backend that pre-process the streaming data, and then you just keep on updating Naviyo, and you will be able to see the changes. The problem will be that if the data is changing too fast, like for instance, you're looking at Twitter data, things like that, then you're going to get too many updates, and that could be problematic. But you could have something that you just code, and you just say, when I click this button, I get new data. And that's up to you and it shouldn't be more than an afternoon of work if you know how to process the streaming. So that is not in there. However, the second part is the part that Juan Camilo Ortiz is working on for his master thesis. Is a project called Tadaba or Tadaba. We need a way of pronouncing this in English. And the whole idea of this is that Navier is really cool. We really like it. But what happened with the crisps that have their 2 gigabytes? Let me not go into the terabytes yet. But the 2 gigabytes of data, how do you process that? Well, basically what, say that again? You could use things like that, but we actually tried, and after doing some research, we found that Elasticsearch, and I don't know if you know it, is a very efficient, it was supposed to be a very efficient backend that allows you to do really quick updates and try to find what's happening in there and run searches. So what Tadaba does is that it creates like a middleware between Navier in the front end to actually allow you to run the queries and actually get the results and get only the sample data that is the one that you need to run. And I have to hurry up because I'm running out of time and I want to showcase all the other projects that we have. So the other project that we are working on, and this is Juan Sebastian Cardona, he has been working with the military hospital here in Bogota. And what they did is create this tool, and I unfortunately don't have time to actually go into the details of this, but again, this is another tool that you can just drop your data set, and it will allow you to find what is different between, for instance, they were very interested in finding what were the things that were different between the people that were getting re-hospitalized and the people that weren't. So people that were returning to the hospital after getting a procedure. So this thing actually first checks for the re-hospitalization and then shows you visualizations for them. I already also talked about Esteban, and he left again. He worked with the Bogota's Council to actually build this application in which he's providing like mobile-ready access to the council members to actually know what is happening with their peers. So they can see in there what are the voting patterns, what are the people that actually got them into the council, what is the Twitter activity that is happening, what are the proposals they have been, make it such that they can actually plan better meetings with their peers. There is another one that is Nicolas, and he mentioned in a very nice way during his 1-minute presentation. And remember that you can see all of these results more deeply if you visit their posters later in the afternoon today. And he wanted to see with a professor in administration if we could actually measure the size of the cocaine market from a business point of view, just by looking at the journal articles, by looking, for instance, at the New York Times. So what he did is do a lot of NLP to actually process. He can tell you how many articles from the New York Times, and then run and put that into a structural database, and then do some exploratory visual analytics. He found very interesting things in there, like for instance, it's very easy from there to identify what are the countries that plant the cocaine, what are the countries that process the cocaine, who are the ones that transport it, and who are the ones that are actually buying, and what is the sizes of each one of those markets. You can also see in this chart that is hopefully labeled because we don't know what colors are. But basically, blue in here is Colombia. As you can see, although it's very difficult to read, that around the 80s, the amount of mentions of Colombia in the New York Times was peaking, whereas around the year 2000, it started getting lower, and green one, that is Mexico, actually started going up. But a few years later, there was a bounce back from Colombia, and he can tell you more about that in his master. The final thing we have is on photo visualization. I also mentioned a little bit about this during the introduction. Like Luis Mesa, what he did is to work on a library that I created called Photo Tree Map, and they basically this library using the same data set you saw before, that is the MoMA Navigator. And again, my students are especially good at keeping bugs for the whole duration of the project. They are really proud of that. So you can see this in a different representation. In this case, we are grouping the data set by nationality, department, classification, and gender. And then immediately you see that we have the most photos from Americans, or the most pieces by Americans. Then we also have a lot of pieces from French, and you can jump into the Americans and see what are the ones in there by department. And then I can see, for instance, photography from Americans. Then that's classified as photographs, and sorry for the nudes in there. this is really funny because this is from a female artist, but let's see like from a gender neutral, and then you can see all the pieces from Americans in photography that are from a gender neutral affiliation. You can go back to each one of the levels and see, for instance, for the French, doing the same analysis, do the same comparison with photographies, and then you can see now that males are like 98% of the things, and only like a few of them are from female artists, and here are some of the photos that you can find. So it's a visualization widget that you can actually use for representing this type of information, and then you have also an application in here that you can use for changing the different parameters. Then David, that didn't get to present early today because he was volunteering, he actually has been working in the other project that I mentioned, that it's called the photo ring. And as you can see in here, if I can make this thing work, basically we're looking at the same data set. I can actually see many different photos. Then I can jump into the next set of photos and then start looking at different areas and being able to change between dimensions. And because I'm running out of time, I'm going to skip more of it. You actually run many experiments, also testing this with different backend frameworks, just to try to see which ones will work better for the purpose at hand. And basically, finally, in accessibility, we have two interesting projects from Antonio de la Vega. He created a crowdsourced application that lets people help fixing web inaccessible pages such that they can actually fix the problems that they have in there. So here is a video that you guys can actually see on your own when you have time. Basically, the whole idea is that you get into the application, you enter the website that you want to fix. As you can see in there, that was very poorly colored. And if you want to fix it like that, the only thing that you have to do is enter the URL of the website. And then with a very easy to use interface, you log into the application, and then you start saying, oh, I want to fix this thing. I want to fix the language. Then I also want to fix what are the images, and you put the descriptions for that are very important for visually impaired people. And then finally, the nice thing is that next time anyone that is using the widget or it's a Chrome extension uses the page, it's going to be fixed, and then it's going to be very good contrast and all the labels on the images, such that is more accessible. And the final one, I promise, is the tactile graphics finder. And this was created by Felipe. And what he did is that we had this problem that we want to show images for the blind. And we created a repository where you can find all the images that people have already found that are very good for this. But the question was, what if I want also to find new images? So basically what you're doing here is that he created an application that queries images from Google. And then after doing that, he goes and tests those images versus a machine learning model. And actually, since this is running on a free server, it's actually taking a while to load. But you can search, for instance, for images of houses or images of cars or whatever you want, and it will get you new images that haven't been classified yet. And the machine learning model actually tells you if they are good or not for being shown to the blind. And since Tiberio is getting angry now, I want to finish now and welcome any questions and thank my wonderful students for all their amazing work. Much.
Yes. Yes. When I talk about the tactile, I'm confused. Images for the blind.
How does that work?
Yeah.
So basically what you do is that there are many techniques at which you can actually show images. Like the simplest one is you take one of these images and then you print it and then you go with, I don't know, something, a spike or something, and you start making holes on the page such that when you turn the page, then it actually has some, how do you say that, relief? I don't know, texture in there that you can actually see the border of that. For that to work, and since we have such low resolution in our hands compared to, for instance, what we have on your eyes, basically what you do is that you have to have very simple images. And it's a pity, like out of 20 demos, this is the only one that is failing. But basically you have to design them in a very simple way. So you try to put something like perspectives that are very easy for sighted people to see. If you try to show that using this technique, it's going to be almost impossible for the blind person to understand. So you have to use things without perspective, without too many crossings, with the most simplest silhouette possible, and then explain that to the user. Apart from that, there are many other techniques. You can also do 3D printing, or you can do, there is also something called Swell Paper, that is a paper that literally swells or grows when you put it into an oven. You just grow something in there, and when you pass it through the oven, it actually has, again, the same texture that you can actually see. So one of the biggest problems nowadays is that we have the hardware for printing these images, but getting good images that blind people can see is very difficult. So in the other project that I show you here, as you can see in this one in here, you can see some examples of images that kind of work. But even people that know about this will create images like this that is actually very difficult to read in there. So the whole idea of the project was to train a machine learning model with examples that could tell us, like, at least some idea of a new image, if that one is good or not. I don't know if that answers your question. Anything else?
Under the frameworks that works with images, a compressive algorithm is applied, or it just doubling the full size of each image?
Do you mean for what image processing frameworks are we using with images? So we are not using any. So basically, our work starts, like for instance, for the photo ring, our work starts where those algorithms finish. Like if we come back here, like coming back to the photo ring. Basically in here, let's see if I can, have more control now. You see here are all the different dimensions that I can use. So I can see by race, by nationality, by gender. So I can start seeing different pieces, and then I can go into the next piece. And for instance, this for some reason is interesting. And then I want to switch dimension, and then start seeing this by a different point of view. Let's say, for instance, in there, it's like the type of representation, or if it is from males or females. Actually, this is not working very properly. But the whole idea in there is that this work starts when you already have the metadata. So what one do you want to use for that? There are tons of techniques, and actually it's commoditized now. So you can just run things with Google's algorithms, or Amazon's, or IBM's, or you name it. Microsoft also is in the game now. But we start from that. And on the other side, for the detecting the images for the blind, the demo that doesn't want to run today, basically what we are using is just a simple machine learning application from Google in a cooperation with them. They're about to launch something called AutoML that lets you train machine learning models with a simple user interface. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to John Alexis for this excellent talk and constructing about the time for the break. We will have a maximum 10 minutes of break in order to try to recover the time. You have very few cookies. So take one cookie and go out. 10 minutes of break, please. We retake with the Pablo Figueroa talk.
Lo que hemos estado haciendo es que el problema es que esta vaina funciona con esto. Entonces tu computador no, pues a menos de que tratemos, no sé si quieres que tratemos. Entonces, para
es un sitio web, creo.
Puede ser, pero hay que instalar la aplicación, instalar el driver. Pero entonces lo que hemos estado haciendo, la forma en que yo estaba presentando, es que te conectas a Hangouts. Y entonces tú haces todo desde acá. Y sencillamente por Hangouts yo muestro tu pantalla que estás compartiendo acá. ¿Me van a entender? Yo creo que eso funcionaría bien. A menos de que tengas audio en los videos. Si tienes videos.
Tengo algo de audio, pero no es importante.
Entonces, si quieres,
entonces lo hacemos.
¿A qué correo de Gmail te mando la invitación?
Pablo.a.figueroa.
¿Será que tengo la grabación o...?
Sí.
Lo que pasa es que después no la puedo volver.
No, pongamos un aviso
de que volveremos a cruzar.
Sí, comenzó con un tema.
Listo. Estamos live.
Parecido a Estados Unidos. Sí se vio. Sí, sí, pues se han usado todo el tema.
No, así es eso.
Sí. ¿Cómo depende? Ya, estamos moviendo aquí, estamos.
Algo.
Yo traigo la copia. Sí,
We are beginning the talk, please. The last cookie. The last two cookies. The very last one.
Gone.
Okay. But talk.
The last cookie. The last cookie. The last cookie.
But the third talk is under the responsibility of Paulo Figueroa. Paulo is one professor of our team in Imagine in the Universidad de los Andes, and he's leading in the last lot of years the VR and the computer graphics and other adventures that you will share with us in the next few minutes. After to do a benchmark with John Alexis. Okay, without more introduction, I let Paulo Figueroa to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Tiberio. Thank you very much to everybody for being here. This is working once in a while, so forgive technology also. What I would like to share with you is a little bit of my research here at the Universidad de los Andes that is in general related to the topic of mixed reality. I'll talk a little bit of my motivation, past endeavors, and something that is keeping me busy lately. So for most of you, this is something that you already know, I hope for all of you. But what is interesting here to notice is that we are an interesting country, very well located, and our industry, in this case, you'll see why I'm interested in these particular areas of our country. We are spread in some way. We are not really only working here in Colombia. In Bogota, there are other departments, and some of you come from some of those departments. It's interesting to see that we are doing research in several places in our country. Of course, we can do more in the future, but this is something that I want you to keep in mind related to where we can develop things related to what I like, which is virtual reality and augmented reality. The Universidad de los Andes, you know it. I hope I still look like this guy, because it was taken long time ago. I won't say how many years, but it's just to say that I have loved virtual reality and augmented reality for a long time. And there are several things that we still can do related to VR and AR in general, mixed reality, in particular because of all the nice toys and very cheap, let's say, toys that we have now. I'm also interested in the video game development in the video game industry, just because developing video games is exactly the same as developing really nice mixed reality applications. So video games it was a very successful kit of the VR technology. Now is the leading industry that is also leading the VR market and the AR market nowadays. We have done in the university several things. I'll try to go really fast from these slides. You'll see later our lab is the main area that we have to do research, and you can see that there are big toys and small toys. Part of what I want to do in VR is to create novel interfaces, how we can interact with information. We have interacted with our hands. Before we had tangible and smaller interfaces, we were just using some backpack with Linux, and we still are using this type of devices, haptic devices, in order to interact not only with the visuals, but also with our touch. This was, I would say, the best example that we had for some years about the type of collaboration that we can do, in this case with our Gold Museum. We were lucky enough to have 20 of their pieces, scan them, and create some interaction environments in which we could not only see, but touch and listen to how these instruments and these elements sound. So that is something that, again, it was a really nice collaboration with our museum, and something that we want to do. I'll pass really fast. This is something that I was doing in my PhD, and I'll come back later. For some years, I was collaborating with the video game and animation industry in Colombia. We were trying to push these industries. We called this strategic plan David for development in animation and video games. But there were several lines. There were about 6 lines of development in these areas. The first one is how you educate people in the country to create video games. And we created several things. One of them was Device. It was just a platform, a community to gather people that were interested in developing games. And people for about a month were trying to learn something and collaborate with other people to create a video game. This was something else that we did in this big project. How to make several small companies in our country to collaborate in a larger endeavor. Here, we call this tool Mono, and it's just a tool that is above what any particular indie developer is using in order to collaborate with other companies. This is something that I was doing during my sabbatical, having fun, of course, and learning how to do this type of kicks, of course. That is something that you have to do if you are doing a sabbatical. But it's just to show, what I want to show here is that you can create really compelling avatars of yourself nowadays if you have the right tools. And I'll come back with this later on. In terms of research, I was also with one of my students, now a PhD student, doing some research on cyber sickness, and we came up with a very simple trick in order to alleviate motion sickness when you are going into virtual stairs. And I invite you, it's a really small contribution that we did some years ago. This was another thing that we did in David, related to David. We call it Jump Camp. We wanted to educate or give some basic knowledge on how to create video games around the country. There were 2,000 people getting certificates around the country, and we allowed these people to collaborate between them, and they created about 100 games, short games that are still some of them available and working in our website. From those efforts, we created a program in Coursera, 5 courses that you can take in how to develop video games based on Unity. I was also active in the Game Developers Conference some years ago, and I convinced some people that are really involved in VR to come with me to San Francisco in 2016, and we did this panel that is available in the GDC vault if you are interested in how. What we wanted to do is to show the people that are just doing games how this crowd of VR academics have been doing things for 15 years that could be useful for VR games in the future. Courses, we do a lot of interesting courses here and here. I just wanted to show something that I'm really interested in the future, how to make computer graphics more virtual, in the sense that you can have courses that are massive, something like a MOOC in Coursera teaching computer graphics, but also use the same material to make the courses that we do in our university. It's very important for many universities to create models that are in some way blended, and that is something that we are starting to dig into here. There are other courses that we do. It's really interesting that we have a course on video games. Students have to go and play instead of reading or doing other type of assignments, and some of them don't go and play. So it's interesting to see why they are not as interested as we think in video games. And we are starting something about computational thinking that I just wanted to show that is the type of things that we are involved here. Interesting installations, we also do installations. This is something that I was lucky enough to have general access to be scanned by me and have a small interface in which we can interact with and connect with a person that is just trying to learn something about the department. Our place here at the university, we are this year will be the 50th anniversary of the Department of Systems and Computer Engineering here in the University of Los Andes, and we are trying to create an interactive environment for that. There are already collaborations. There are about 6 or 7 professors here at the University of Los Andes in different departments that do research on video games, and we are trying to create a group that do something. And one of the first things that we do, let's see, amazing. Okay, this is actually better than my real world stuff. It's augmented reality. Yeah, this is augmented reality. So something that we are trying to do is to create serious games. In this case, let's imagine that we want to start a dialogue between a person who is from the Centro Democrático, who is between 18 and 30 years old, and a male, with a female from FARC in her 40s, and I don't know, with another sexual orientation. Is how we can create dialogue using games, and that is one game that we are now designing. Collaborations, we create some ideas that are sometimes interesting to some companies. There is a company, a startup that is called ImagineX, that was interested enough in one of our ideas to do 360 visualizations of apartments, either new or some that we want to refurbish. And this tool allows us to change the things that we are looking at inside the apartment. It's a very simple application of 360 videos, but what is interesting here is that we use basic GPU development that you can do in any language right now to make the changes in the apartment as fast as we can. More research, and here I'll try to do some highlights of research that the students do at different levels. I started with the bachelor's students. They have really interesting ideas sometimes, but the length and the amount of work that they are able to do in the short period of time that they are doing the projects is very limited. So, for example, this student, Sergio Madera, at the beginning he was doing serious games with me, and this is something that you can see in, I forgot the place, but there is a link in the presentation that you can see later. It's a game like SimCity, but this is just for recycling. This is what we want to show them. And on the right, he had the idea of trying to do research on why people are motivated in games and how we can translate that motivation into other fields, especially what the person is interested in. And there are several serious games or serious environments. This is called Avitica, for example, that allow you to, in some way, register what you are doing and give you points every time that you do an achievement. Some people are really good at encouraging themselves to use these tools and fulfill their tasks, or people not, and we were trying to study why there are differences between them. At the level of masters, there are several people. The picture is rather small, but let's imagine that in the future we want to play with other people in VR, but we don't have the same tools that other people have. So one person has the Gear VR, the other have the Oculus, the other have the Vive, and another person is just in a PC. How we can make the interface fair enough for all of them, and at the same time, how we can make the interface good enough so each one of these people believe and feel that they are having the best interface they can from their point of view, from the VR setup that they have. Usually this type of problem is solved by having the minimum type of interface that you can have in all the environments. So you will have the Gear VR for everybody, and the Vive user will say that he wasted his money and he won't play that. So this is something that we are doing with Johan in these days. For our master students, we try to do whatever they are interested and try to see what we can learn from that. Carlos Torres was one of our master students that is also a musician, and he wanted to see how we can use AR and VR to teach remotely how to play guitar. So here, let's say our learner has a HoloLens. With the HoloLens, we can show more information on top of the guitar. The right, what it shows is what are the points where he has to put his fingers. It's part of the training in some way. And his teacher, he has some tools that he can use in order to show him new content about what the piece that he's trying to learn. So in this type of a scenario, what we are learning is how we combine VR and AR in novel environments for learning. In this case, in a scenario where the professor is not really in the same place as the student. And another student, Juliana, she was interested in dancing and how we can teach salsa to people like me that don't dance that much, let's say. So, well, I wasn't one of his subjects. I specifically denied that pleasure to her. So, in this particular case, what was interesting is how we can learn motion activities. And she, in some way, did a very good study on how motion activities are taught, and how we can use virtual reality in order to teach that type of activities. And what we learned, which was very interesting here, is that VR allows us to isolate ourselves from the environment. And we felt, or people here were feeling less timid about the type of movements that they were doing. And in some way, they were learning. We still have to test that. They were learning better than just in a class. PhD students, they have more time and they do better things or more into detail. Diego was trying to interact with robots that are in another place. The basic idea is in the future, let's say that you have a disabled person and you are trying to communicate with him or her. He doesn't answer, so you want to see what happened in the other side. And that person happened to have a robot that is collaborating with him. You can in some way start to control that robot in a remote way, but you only have a cell phone. So how you interact with the cell phone in order to control a robot that has many more degrees of freedom than the cell phone can afford. With Jose, something that we are trying to do is to make the experience of VR the same in different virtual reality environments. So let's say that you have a big environment that has walls around you, or you have just a gear here, which is what we see here, and we want to select one chair in an opera theater. So which chair you will choose? And we did an experiment, and independent on the type of technology that we use, people select different chairs depending on the technology, which is bad for VR still, because we want people to select the chair that is best for him, not the chair that is best for the technology that he's using. So that is something that we are starting to dig into, what kind of tricks we can use in order to make the experience similar to our environments. Victor is working in collaborative augmented reality for teaching. In this particular case, we are creating environments that are collaborative using just tablets that many schools have, even in rural areas here in Colombia. And what we want to show is how these tools can be used in order to learn better. What is happening now is that these tablets that are provided by the government come with some software, but it's just for each one of the tablets, and there is little integration of what the professor is doing with the students and these tablets, and that is something that we are trying to change. So I wanted to be really fast. That is all that I wanted to tell with you, to talk with you, and I'm open to see if you have any. Thank you.
Well, my question is in the project in which you were working with the.
Thank you. My question was in the project in which you were working with the guitar, learning how to play the guitar. How did you address the problem of tracking? It was markerless augmented reality, or how do you track the guitar in order to correctly put the augmented information? Thank you.
It's a first prototype, as all everything that we do here. I don't know if you can see here on top of the guitar, we use a marker, a Vuforia marker. On top of the HoloLens, we are running all the HoloLens software that allows the user to see an avatar of his professor, and he can see this that is called tablatura, which I don't know because I don't know how to play. Sorry. And there are other tools that he's looking just in the air. But on top of that, we are running Vuforia markers in order to superimpose in the guitar the type of feedback that we want to show. We want to show where he has to put his fingers and at what time. So on the right, it's not very big, but here is the Vuforia marker, and here is the augmented reality markers that the user has to press.
Thank you.
Sure.
So just a
Sure. You say that in your experience, some students don't like to play it, right? Right? Faulty. Why they don't like to play? That might backfire if we.
Well, the question, just for everybody to listen, is I was talking about one of our courses, which is on video games. And I was talking that some of our students, despite the fact that we believe that they like to play all the time, they don't do the assignments which are related to play. And why, or how we can use gamification in order to make them more involved into learning in this particular topic or any topic that we want. Gamification is one of the topics that we use, which is in general how we use this in some way motivation, yeah, motivation that people have in order to play and have fun, and in other things, in this case, learning. And what we have found is that the internal motivation of a student depends on what's happening in his life at any time. And it's something that in our university we're starting to find ways to make better. One of the things that we have found, which is normal for any students, is that there are some peaks where they have exams and or they have many things to do. But we are starting to find that as any other person, we try to maximize our time and how we spend time in things that we have to do. And if these many things give me I don't know, 30% of class B and this 20% of class C, and this gives me only 2% of class video games, well, it's very easy to maximize what are the type of things that you have to. We are trying to create gamified experiences in this course. For example, the more you go to play, the more bonus you get for not only for your gaming experience, but other activities that we have in the course. And that is in some way working, but in some way, the main issue is how we change the attitude of the students towards the type of activities that they have to do. Another activity that they have to do this year, and that's why I have this picture for this term's, last term's course, is they had to create a team, and they had to play in some way in one of the games that have professional leagues and have the experience of have a team in a professional league. The main difference is a professional league in any e-sport have to play weekly about 20 hours per person, half time. I don't have a course of half time, yeah, no many credits. So they had to play 1 hour per week, not only not 20, but only 1. And some groups didn't manage. And why they didn't manage is because, as any sport, as any competitive sport, an e-sport requires commitment and requires discipline. And that type of discipline is not free. It's something that you have to work yourself. And I guess some of them realized that, and some way they got a good experience. But the discipline is part of what we wanted to show, which is difficult to, well, we try to gamify it in terms of you have to play in order to get the discipline, but some people got it, some people didn't.
What are your major findings regarding the uses of cardboard and comparing with the vibe and of the different price and variety of headsets, VR headsets?
Sure. So if I can rephrase, what are my major findings on this type of environments where we have different VR and AR hardware and they are collaborating in the same shared environment? So what we have found is, so far, we can create a compelling experience for each one of the users. Sorry, that is good enough and is in some way fair with other people. Let's say the Gear VR, we decrease the quality of the visualization because it doesn't have as many CPU power or GPU power as the other environments, and they can play and they can have the same throughput, the same speed for playing as the other guys. What we were playing here, the simplest one is, I don't know if many of you know hot ball or Tingo Tingo Tango here in Colombia, which is you throw a ball and you have to throw it again really fast. So they were playing Tingo Tingo Tango, and the time that they had, we were measuring the time in each one of the competitors, and it was pretty much fair in all the environments. That is good. The second thing is we can fake, and that is something that we are doing now. If they are not in the same environment, we can fake the type of output that each one of the users see. So they believe that everybody has the same VR setup. So we can fake
the type of animation that the Gear VR guy is doing. So the guy in the Vive believes that the Gear VR is actually a Vive. It's just to add some animations from the Vive point of view. And that is something that helps in the experience, because I don't want to see the little poor guy that is the Vive playing against me, the big guy that has the Vive. I want to play in some way among equals. And that is something that also helps to the experience. But something that we also found is that it's important to pay attention not only to the functionality of the game, which is in this case very simple, to throw the ball and get the ball, but also to the social functions or social abilities that each one of the persons has to have. So for example, in another game that we were doing, people were communicating through voice. And if they were friends, the guy in the Vive was cheering and saying, hey, say hello to me in the virtual environment. The Vive guy can do it because he has hands and he has controls, but the Gear guy cannot do it because he only has here a trackpad. So that wasn't necessary for the game, but it was necessary for the social communication that they require in the virtual environment. And that is in some way related to the type of affordances that we expect from people. If you see an avatar, you see a person in VR that has 2 hands and 2 legs, you expect that person to say hello and to walk. But if the person is just a Gear VR, he only has a Gear VR, he cannot control those degrees of freedom. So we have to compensate in some way those hands.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And Fernando de la Rosa will share with us his works and his thought about the near future of interactive robotics. And after his talk, we will have, or you will have a lunch for yourself, of course. And we will be here at 2 o'clock.
Sí, lo coloco acá también. Este es el siguiente y el de atrás. ¿Cuál es?
As you see, is not concentrated in one subject as other workshops, but in order to give us a landscape about digital computing area and the possibilities to advance in one of them. For this reason, the different professor shared with us their experience and their thought about what to do in the next years. And tomorrow we will do the same analogous exercise with the people that are here, as Diego, that has played the game, how to be in the market with a low-end innovative product or proposal based in the last result of the, among others, of course, in the last result of the research, and how to connect more actively the academic work with the industrial application. The tutorial is running. Please. Huh? No, it's working. Exceptionally, the microphone. I have the two others that are not working.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this workshop. Tiberio told you, my name is Fernando de la Rosa. I am an associate professor at the System and Computing Department, Engineering Department in this university. And I told you about the most recent works in the topic of interactive robotics. I will present this work, recognition approaches apply in the human-robot interaction. This talk is more technical, and I present the last work that we showed at the one international symposium in intelligent computing system this year in March. This work was done by some students, Said Rodriguez, Catherine Perez, and Carlos Quintero from the Universidad Santo Tomás that did here your master in computer engineering. Let's go. So the human robotic interaction nowadays is increasing, is more and more important, and we see these days several applications. For example, we will see the humanoid robot interacting maybe with children. That is a very common application with humanoids or with toys. In this case, the children interact naturally and reliable with the robots, and there are other type of interaction. For example, with industrial and art robots in different work environments. Here, or for example, we can interact with robots in different environments as hotels or museums or different places where there are visitants. And we can also interact with robots in a remotely way. For example, in this project, a person sends the instruction to the robot by using his gestures or command voice. So human-robot interaction is now each day more important to advancing social robotics. And in our case, the recognition techniques from machine learning are useful for natural human interaction. So we identify these main ideas, and so we propose this approach that use a recognition approach to define natural and reliable multimodal interaction with robots. And that is the idea of the work that I will show you in this talk. That is the agenda. Here we see the two works that we developed about applying machine learning in the case of human-robot interaction. So the problem definition in general for these two words. The idea is to recognize multiple types of information to interact with the robot. So the idea is that the user can use different ways of communication to interact with a robot. And our approach is based on machine learning techniques, and each of these techniques use a two-stage supervised learning classifier for each modality of interaction. So for each modality of information, we define supervised learning classifier. And because we use different type of information, we define a multimodal system composed of unimodal classifiers. And finally, we test this multimodal system with different application cases. So the first work is about emotion recognition. So the idea is to have a natural interaction between the user and the robot. And this type of work idea is well documented in main important reviews of US robotics and European robotics. And for our works, for this work in particularly, we are interested in recognize facial expressions and the audio or voice commands of the user. So we have to interact with the robot. We have to input data. We can see several and different words working in this type of problem with different approaches. And we have here some of them, because there are, since more or less 10 years ago, we have different solutions and different approaches to deal with this problem of human interaction, human-robot interaction. And we have here some characteristics that the researchers use to approach the problem. For example, the feature extraction of audio and video information, the use of neural networks, the use of convolutional neural network for video or for audio, the classification of gesture, motion gesture of the user, and this give us the idea of the importance of that subject in this topic. For our first work, we define our system where we have two multimodal inputs: the facial information taken from a and the voice of the user. So the idea is to with this is to classify the emotion that the robot can detect, and with this result, the robot can define a way to approach or to communicate with the user, depending on the state of the emotion. So we use a facial gesture classifier and a voice classifier, and with the result of this these two subsystems, we define a combined classifier to have a final result of the recognition of the emotion. So for the facial gesture classifier, so we have as input the video of the obtained by the camera, and we process each frame independently. So with this information, we use neural network to obtain to classify the general emotion that was detected in the video that was obtained by the camera. So in this work, we use 4 classes of emotion. There are happiness, anger, surprise, or neutral. So the result of the classification is one of these emotions. And we obtain the video confidence of the classification given by the ratio between the frame detected, the emotion, and then detected the emotion currently divided by the total frame of the video. So in this way, we obtain the video confidence of the result. Here, so in this part, we use a computational network, and here we have the detail of the. In this part, here with 8 layers. Mainly, here there are the definition, and we obtain we have as input the different frame. This process is done for each frame of the video. And for each frame, we have a final classification of one of the 4 classes that we define. And the idea after the classification of each frame is to give a final detection, a final classification of the main emotion that was detected in the video. So to define this neural network, we define different characteristics for this network, and we test each of one, and we have the result of each test here, and we obtain that with the parameter of the test number 3, we have the best accuracy for the video detection. So at the end, with this architecture of the neural network, we have an accuracy of about 86%. So the other input that we use is the voice classifier. So in this case, the input is the audio of the user during the interaction with the robot. And we have to obtain some feature that characterize this input, and we use the mere frequency subtract coefficient that defines the frequency of the small time windows. For each time window, define this coefficient, and we obtain at the final of the audio the main values for this coefficient for all the video, for all the audio. So we can characterize the audio for this coefficient. Fine. With this coefficient, we have the features of the audio for the user, and we can classify this information to obtain at the final the recognition of the emotion detected to the user. So we can see here the process to obtain the male frequency central coefficient. So we can process the signal. At the end, we obtain, there are a lot of coefficients that characterize the audio, but we only use the first 13 that we consider are the main coefficient to characterize the audio. With these audio features, we define, we use them with four one class classifier that use support vector machine. We define one classifier to recognize, to define the confidence of the recognition for each of the class that we are interested in. For example, this will be the classifier for happiness, is for neutral, for surprise, and for anger. Each classifier gives us level of confidence of the feature that we use as the characterization of the audio. And with these results, at the final, we choose as the emotion recognized the emotion that has the best confidence given for each of these classifiers. So at the final, we have an audio confidence given by the maximum level of the confidence of each classifier for each emotion. So, and here for each emotion, the classifier has different parameters. So we have to find the best parameter to have the best accuracy to classify anger and to classify happiness. So each classifier use his own parameters. And at the final, the multi-class audio classifier accuracy in general is about 70%. So we have a better accuracy recognition with we obtained a better level of recognition with the video classifier, because it's about 66, I think. And now we have the result of the two classifiers for facial gestures and then for the voice classifier, and we combine the result of both recognitions using a weighted sum. So in this case, we have the value of the confidence of the recognition if the two classifiers detected the same emotion, if they agree with the same result. So here we have the confidence of the recognition given by the two classifiers. And if both classifiers give different results, we use the result of the best classifier. In our case, we will normally we will keep the classification given by the facial gesture recognition, because it has a better confidence and a better accuracy. But that is the idea, to use multimodal input for the recognition. And at the final, we have emotion detected. Here we show you the experiment that tests our approach. So here we have the two inputs that have been recognized for the system. We ask 11 users to perform 10 different repetition of 4 emotions. So at the final, we have 110 videos composed of about 30,000 images that can be classified, and 110 audios. And we divide this data into two groups, the training set and the validation set. That the training to define the in both classifiers, the model classification, and the validation set to have the results of the model classification obtained by the approach. And here we have the confusion matrix. The rows are the real emotion that the user did in the moment of the registration, and here is the emotion that was recognized by the face recognition, and here by the voice recognition. So for happiness, we have this number of the image that has been classified correctly, and there are some fake detections for the other emotions, and that for all the 4 emotions that we work. And here we have a table showing the agreement between the 2 classifiers. So in general, we can see that the both classifiers are mainly given in a big percentage, are given the same recognition for the same emotion, but it is not perfect. Here we show you the studio case that we use to show the use of this recognition system, and the idea is that the robot respond to the emotion detected to the user. So in this case, the idea is that the robot take the role of an sales agent to try to buy a product to to try to buy a product to the customer. And here we have now the audio, there are a dialogue, and when the user interact with the robot, we can see the result of each of the classifier and the final result given by the combined classifier. So the robot can decide to change the dialogue depending of the emotion that it recognizes of his customer. So that we have the audio signal, the processing of the audio signal, and the information of the video obtained in real time. And during the dialogue, the robot recognizes the emotion of the user to define to change the dialogue and to try to convince the customer to buy his product. That is the idea. Okay. Sorry. With the same idea, and with the same general idea about the recognition system, we work with a system that recognizes the voice commands of the user and motion gesture to define instructions to the robot. So an instruction is defined by a voice command and a motion gesture. The idea is to learn to the robot to recognize these instructions, and the robot can answer to the recognition of each instruction. So here we have an architecture that is similar to the previous work, but in this case we use the body gesture obtained by a Kinect and the voice command. So we have different modes that define the system, the mode that detects the motion. With this information, we can define the features that characterize each motion gesture done by the user. In the same way, we have to detect the input of the voice, and with the audio of this command, we characterize the voice using the same technique of the previous word, the mere frequency substrat coefficients. With these features, we use different classifiers to obtain the instruction that we try to learn to the robot. So we find five instructions. So each classifier gives recognize a gesture with giving a confidential value. And at the final, we have combined module that take the decision of what was the best value of the recognition for the instruction. And it reproduces an action to show the user that he understands the instruction, to have the interaction with the user, to the recognized input. So for the gesture detection, we have, in this case, we have two different motion gesture, maybe because the gesture is defined in different Windows times, or because they is it is because it is done by different users. For example, I can give as instruction levantar el brazo several times. With the same user, we can have different samples for the same gesture with the same user. And it's the same problem with different users. So we can normalize each gesture with the same number of samples. So we normalize the input of each gesture with the same number of samples. And with this definition, we can characterize here we have the coordinate joints for nine important points of motion of the skeleton of the user. So here we have two different moments of the gesture, and we characterize this change by the vector that define the initial state to the final state. And we did the same processing for the M samples for each gesture. So we have a lot of information that characterize a gesture. And we have to do this for several times for different users to characterize different gestures. That is for the motion classifier. And for the voice classifier, we use the same technique that the previous work, using different one classifier for each instruction that is learned to the robot. At the end, we have an gesture recognition and instruction recognition given by the voice classifier and an instruction recognition given by the motion classifier. And the decision model has to take the final, have to give the final result with the best confidence for the instruction recognized. That is the general idea of the classifier. And here we have a little difference because in this case, this is the training phase for each classifier. We give the instructions, we characterize the instructions to learn the robot. We pass to the training process and we obtain the classification model. And after that, in the classification phase, we obtain others user samples. We use our classification model. We obtain a result, but if the level of the confidence is low, the system can ask to the user to confirm the answer. So here we have information given by a user if the classification if the instruction recognition has a low level of confidence. And with this information, this sample can be classified, can be considered as a sample to be classified in the system. At the end, we obtain a better model classification with this information. And here we have the processing that can make the decision model. And we have 4 different results of the combination. Each model gives us the instruction that was recognized, that is the label, and the confidence. The label is these values, wise, and the confidence that the delta of the delta values. So if both classifier gives the same label, recognize the same instructions, that is the best result. There is no problem. There are no different results. If each classifier gives different instruction recognition, so the system obtains or keep the instruction recognition with the best confidence value. So in this case, that is the value for the motion gesture. That is better. The confidence is better than the audio confidence, and that is the other case when the audio confidence is better than the motion confidence. And here is the case where the result of the recognition is different and the values of confidence are very low. So the system cannot decide what was the instruction to be recognized. In this case, the system can ask to the user to confirm what was the instruction that was done by the user to get better result in the next iteration of the system. Here there are a table with some experiments. We have five instructions to be learned to the robot. Hola with this motion gesture, cabeza. The audio is cabeza with this motion gesture, and so for all of five instructions that we want to learn to the robot. And we test the system, unfortunately, with 4 users. So that is something that we can do better in the future, in the near future. Here there are some results of the learning for the different instructions, and in this function we have the number of iterations of the system and the number of accumulated error for each of the instructions. That is for the user 1, and here we have for the user 1 the accumulated errors, and here the same result for the user 2. So we have 4 tables, 1 for each user. And now video. In this case, it is the training phase when it starts the input of the information. The robot gives some instructions. Here are the information of the motion gesture and the output. For example, derecha, and with an audio. And this is done many times. A lot of time for each user to obtain a good quantity of data. And it changed the instruction to be learned. And that is the motion that the robot can reproduce recognize this instruction. And we do the same for the other users. For example, cabeza and the motion associated. That is the training phase. The other user. And now we are in the interaction with the robot. When the user done the instruction, and the robot have to recognize the instruction to reproduce the motion that has given, to define that to confirm that they recognize the instruction. And if the robot has not enough level of confidence, it asks the user to confirm the instruction that he gave to the robot, that he done to give better result in the next iteration of the system. So during the iteration, the system can become better during time. That is the same idea. Okay, some conclusion about these words. So we have a proposal of an approach to recognize multiple types of information to interact with a robot. That is the main contribution that we will to give to this topic, to work with different types of information. And the approach was tested by recognizing emotion, voice commands, motion gesture, and we can add another input to this interaction. The approach favors the recognition of the most reliable type of information. But the results are not so good, really. So we define some future work. The first, to extend the multimodal system to recognize a more complex set of cases, because in both cases we recognize only 4 cases for the first word and 5 cases for the second word. So the idea is to extend the number of places to recognize. And the second one, to register data in more real environments to deal with noisy data, because we work in a very controlled environment, so we have good audios and good videos. But in real scenarios, we don't have the same conditions, so we don't have the same result with these classifiers. To define experiment with more users to have more information, so to obtain better results, better accuracy, and better confidence of the recognition, and to identify and test the approach with other application cases. Some reference. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Questions? Just one. What happens if the both models, get from the voice recognition and gesture recognition? What happens if both models get the same score?
The same score?
Yes. For example, if in the same case, in some slide I saw that was classified as the same time as neutral and what was angry. No, nothing else. But what happens if the emotion is classified as with the same score? Both emotions classified with the same score. What happens in this case? But it will to the
okay, if I understand. That is the ambiguous case. I understand that what happens if two or more of this classifier gives different classes, different result with the same score. That is the question. Because if you have the same recognition instruction or the same recognition, there is no problem. That is a confirmation. But if you have different recognition classes with the same level of confidence, that there is a problem because the system, we can decide which is the best result. But there is a thing to take into account. Each of these classifiers has a different accuracy. They are different accuracy. So, for example, in emotion, for example, we have four classifiers, but this classifier is better, and that is the worst. And that is the worst, and that is the better. So, okay? So if we have the same score of confidence, but each classifier have different accuracy, so we can decide which confidence is better in her recognition. The problem maybe can be if all the classifiers have the same accuracy and they define different classes of recognition. So in this case, the system can decide which is the better label or the better emotion recognized by the system.
But in this case, we have the same accuracy for surprise and neutral. So what is going to be the answer of the model? Because
How in this case, for example,
in this
yes.
case, we are exactly the same scoring. Could happen. Nothing.
Very good question. Here, sorry, maybe here. Here, maybe we have this. Maybe we have different result with the same contents.
But in this case, you just
I suppose that the system can decide if you have the same different result with the same level of confidence. I suppose that the system cannot decide. So it can decide for all of one, but it's not sure that it is the better, it's the best.
So in this case, maybe the model can follow.
Exactly.
Follow
Yes.
result. In this case.
The system in this case can fail.
Questions? This afternoon we at 2 o'clock. We will have two very interesting topics on image and video analytics and machine learning application. And after the posters, we will go downstairs to poster session and open lab in the last part of this afternoon. don't you have not too much time to launch, but that is hard in science. We come back at 2 o'clock here. Thank you.
Sí.
Se paga.